Hello, could you please? Okay, about Tom her nå. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good morning. Please help yourself with the coffee and find a chair. This is a snowy winter day, so welcome to the snowy Holocaust Center. I'm Guri Hjeltesam, the director here, and it's such a pleasure to see you all this morning. And welcome to everybody watching us online. We are streaming this. I do appreciate your time and attention, but first and most, everybody being in this room. Nice to have so many of you here. And as you all know, we are about to embark important days, an important day that will confirm what many of us already know too well. Documentation plays an essential role in confirming genocide. Documentation plays an essential role in confirming other crimes against humanity, and it plays an essential role in taking such crimes seriously, and plays, of course, an essential role in providing a ground for reconciliation. When ISIS attacked Sinjar on August 3rd, 2014, the Yazidi people were brutally driven away. Nearly 6,500 of them were arrested. They became slaves of the ISIS warriors, many for several years. Systematic rape was one of the perpetrators' weapons in their effort to eradicate this vulnerable minority. How to respond to such atrocities? As Ingvild Plesner said the other night on national television here in Norway, the first step is to acknowledge that these Yazidis were exposed to genocide. Recognition and documentation of these crimes are crucial for reconciliation. And I think you all will agree here. Where you are today, the Norwegian Center for Holocaust and Minority Studies was established actually to put it very shortly, I'm an historian, this is a very short history. This center exists because our government and authorities recognized the crimes committed to the Norwegian Jews during World War II. 1/3 of the Jewish population were deported from Norway and killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Our existence then is part of the Norwegian post-war healing process, actually. That's what we do every day, and there's a hot discussion in the Norwegian media these days about a book attacking the Norwegian resistance movement for not doing enough for the Jews. So this is actually every day in the Norwegian newspaper and social media. It's a hot discussion. It's been going on for 6 weeks. The mandate of this center, and you should take some time, Ingvild, you should allow them to have some time to watch this building today. There is an exhibition downstairs, 1 floor down, on the building. It's a 100 years old building, but started in the First World War, ended up in the Second World War with a Nazi leader, and ended actually from 2005 to be the place where this center was. We conduct research on the Holocaust, other genocides, and on contemporary minority issues. And the center educates Norwegian public. We have 200 school pupils every week here. Through schooling, exhibitions and seminars, we try to outreach and inform about the documentation and new knowledge. And thank you, Ingvild. You have more energy than most of us. Thank you so much for making this important day happen. And a big thank also to our co-organization, Norwegian People's Aid, the Norwegian Church Aid, the Stephanos Alliance, the Norwegian Humanist Association, and not at least Norwegian Yazidi community. Thank you. And thank you all for empowering us, and thank you for helping us make the Yazidi case visible for another international audience. And I must say, on behalf of the Norwegian people, which I'm not representative of, but I hope you can say, we're very proud of this Peace Prize coming on Monday. You must be excited, so congratulations. So, have a good seminar, good luck, and welcome, everybody. Ingvild, the floor is yours. Is not?
Having the first film.
Denne uken så det en religiøs høytid som heter Jumma for jezidier, hvor de samler seg i den hellige byen Raleigh. Det en slags pilgrimsreise for jezidier fra hele verden, fra hele Kurdistan-området, fra Irak, Det rett og slett veldig mye liv som I Lalish akkurat denne uka. Det dans, det religiøse ritualer, samtidig som at folk døper barna sine I denne perioden. Og så også Baba Sheikh der, som på en måte vårt religiøse overhode. Baba Sheikh for oss, som paven for katolikkene.
صباح الخير رشباش رشباش صباح الخير. Good morning everyone. What you just saw was a first documentary film that we produced for this project on inclusive citizenship and human rights, and it's now being posted with English texting, and it will come in Kurdish also eventually for our big launch of the new website on the coming Sunday. For those of you who didn't understand Norwegian, and I assume that is quite a few, and I'm so happy to see so many international guests here, at least those of you who are Yazidi, and I'm also very happy that so many of you are, you would completely understand where this is from, Lalish, the holy city of the Yazidi, which I was so fortunate to visit just a few weeks ago, and also to meet with and talk to Baba Chawish. And the other person you saw here was, of course, Nariman Hama, and all Norwegian Yazidi, I'm sure, know her, because she was the one portraited in a documentary on the Yazidi called Yazidi, made by the Norwegian famous film director Anja Breien, who is also here, actually in 2009. So a groundbreaking new documentary. So a big hand for you, Anja Breien. And the little girl in that movie, which you will see also posted on our new website from Sunday, the little girl in the movie now has become 19 years old. She was then sitting on her father's laps, and now she's studying law at the University of Oslo. And she has taken part in the preparation of this conference and tonight's evening event, together with Revin and where are you, Revin? Revin Aswad and her husband. Revin is also a coordinator here on behalf of the Yazidi Cultural House, officially representing them here as a co-partner of this conference. So thank you also to you, Revin. We'll hear more from you later. And now I'm so happy, Nariman, to give the opening words and the floor to you.
Ingrid. Before I start speaking, I would just like to welcome our Kurdish participants. بالإنجليزية سافرنا بس بريم بس تبياس خيراتنا وكم نادم معنا أس كجاش يختار مش بادرة.
Oops.
قالك كيف نعطيكم حمو إذا كل هرينا وسيبيتكم كو تشتكي مازن شيدو كتشابتن. All right. Firstly, this is an expert seminar, and while I am Yazidi and a student, I am far from an expert, which is why I would firstly just like to say that I am extremely grateful, humbled, stand here in front of so many distinguished guests, both from the international community, the Yazidi community, and the national community. I am happy that we can all gather for such an important cause. In 3 days, Nadia Murad, Yazidi and ISIS survivor, will receive the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to end sexual violence in conflicts and her plight for the Yazidis. The prize is a monumental acknowledgement of Nadia's work, as well as it is an acknowledgement of decades of genocide, injustice, and violence performed against the Yazidis. The road toward this accolade has been long, demanding, and painful, not only for Nadia, but for the Yazidis as well. Because today, it is nearly 4.5 years since the Yazidi genocide, 4.5 years since ISIS besieged Sinjar, since nearly 400,000 were forced to flee, 4.5 years since 6,500 Yazidis were taken in captivity, most of them held as sex slaves. 4.5 years since the men and women are killed and homes set ablaze. Today, 4.5 years later, the road ahead is difficult and poses a multitude of hard and complicated questions. Witnessing the massacres in Sinjar from Norway as a 15-year-old ignited something in me, an idea of justice. And today, as a law student, I am naturally still very passionate about justice. And justice is a word that evokes many emotions and a myriad of associations. However, justice can never be synonymous with revenge. Regardless, justice must still persevere so that the ISIS terrorists and anyone who contributed to the genocide will be put to trial. The road to justice, however, requires a great deal of patience, as these are processes that take a lot of years. In many ways, this is an ongoing genocide. Today, 5 years after the horrific events in Sinjar, there is still much left undone. Life for Yazidis in the post-ISIS age is difficult. This has been a collective trauma for the entire Yazidi community, and particularly for those directly affected. Although ISIS is in retreat, the fear amongst Yazidis is still present. Around 3,000 Yazidi men, women, and children are still missing. The internally displaced Yazidis live in poor conditions, spending cold winters and humid summers in refugee camps. They cannot return home due to many reasons. The safety in Sinjar and the neighboring villages is still not up to par. Sinjar is a minefield, both in a literal and in a political sense. Geopolitical tensions and different groups with different motives makes it difficult for Yazidis to return home. We need to settle the past in order for the Yazidis to look to the future. The aftermath of the massacres discovered more than 200 mass graves containing the remains of thousands of victims in areas formerly controlled by ISIS. The people in the mass graves need to be identified to allow families of victims to bury their loved ones properly. The genocide must be documented and internationally recognized. Injustice against the Yazidis will continue to press on as long as the Yazidis live in refugee camps, as long as the perpetrators continue to roam freely, and as long as the rights to Yazidis are not secured. It is no secret that the global community failed in 2014. However, I have great hope that this time it will not fail. Victimhood and suffering has long been a part of Yazidi history, a history of few happy endings and a multitude of antagonists. And as important as it is to never forget what has happened to us, it is equally important to acknowledge the progress that have been made. We have to remember that we are more than our victimhood and tragic stories. The aftermath of the genocide proved, however, that this story includes heroes as well. The countless of brave women who, like Nadia, survived to testify. The countless of men and women who laid down their life in combat, who refused to go down without a fight. And of course, the countless of organizations, volunteers, and changemakers who listened to us and who worked tirelessly to help Yazidis. As cliché as it may sound, they are the heroes of this story. And looking at this diverse group in front of me reminds me of that. For a long time, I thought that the Yazidis were alone in their fight. Looking around in this room proves just how wrong I was. A room of academics, of NGOs, of politicians, of students, Yazidis from Germany to Georgia to Sweden and Iraq, all here for the same cause, all here to ensure that the promise of never again is a promise being kept. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you so much for having the honor to speak here.
بیرو باوریت ازدیاتی دا وقتی دست بکرنا عردی وقتی عرض خود همو آف بود بی وقتی دا لالش رب العالمین چکر و توی وقتی دا عرض خود همو جمدی بو آخ لالش بری هر جیکیش لالش دست بکر او آخات چه بوی اجبروی که کوکوونترین جی لالشا نورانیا و پشتی بویا آخ جی پاشی آدم پیغمبر هر دیره چه بویا و دوی آخی دا چه بویا وی آوا لالش چه بویا اجبروی که جی جیان هیره دست بکریا بشری جی الویده دست بکریا هر تشتر جور دست بکریا اجبروی که جی کوونترین جیا لالشا نورانی لی مخابن گلک جاری هاتی خراب کرنا لالش اجبروی که بلکی کونیاوی زاف دیار نبیاج دیوارو آخو اوید وی انجی گلک جاری هاتی صوت طنو خراب کرنو طالان کرنو ویران کرن براستی کونیا ازدیاتی کس نکارا تاریخ که محدانش برکو ام ادبیجین آدم پیغمبر لالش درست بیا و جبرکو هر تا هنگی هتا نهوجی ازدی کو ام ادبیجین هین ام کونترین نجوان دیانتا حموا ام هر و هر حوالت خود پاریس آبوینا و دائما جی هر ما خود پاراستیا و ام چو جارا نبینا دجی چو دیانتاش ازدی پیشی عبادت خودت ویا 7 ملیاکتا ازدی ملتکی وکو حج سروشتیت کت حواله سروشتیه ام وکو ملت ازدی جی براستی ملتکی آشتی خوازن دینکی آشتی خوازا وقتی هر ازدیک تو هر نکوی حش آوا کرنیت کا حش یانیت کا حش انساناتیت کا رب العالمین هر کسک یا رب العالمین اف خودی هندی مازن بشر و دایی بو باشی بو جیانه بو ساغبونه بو براتیه بو حوالتیه بو جیانا خوش و آوا کرنا ولاتا نبو کشتن و نخوشی وان دایا ام دائما وقت دعایت کن ام پیشی بو خلقیت کن پاشی بخو بترجي ام ساكنينه وبدا سيخ ما بلندن وبر رب العالمين وبر بروجي روش هلات وروش آفا ام بري خود دينه ام بجين يا ربي تبدا خاطر نابي خو خدا خاطركي تو الحالة في الدنيا حمي برصي باشي مثل
Actually the first documentary film that will be posted on Sunday, made by the also very famous film director Sahavi Sanjawi, who will be with us later today, who's producing documentary film for the Minority Network. So I think we should actually give him a big hand for this movie. And now it's my honor and great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who is not only a very well-known leading academic research professor at the Norwegian Institute of Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Henrik Syse, and a well-known philosopher studying and teaching about justice, in particular the ethics of war. But also is the deputy chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee, or the Norwegian Nobel Committee.
Whatever.
Henrik Syse, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your generosity, Ingvild. Ladies and gentlemen, what an honor to be with you. I've been looking forward to this day. I've been looking forward to next week as well, which we hope will be a wonderful celebration, but also a chance to talk about things that are extremely serious and deeply sad. So let's see if we manage to combine those two, the celebration and the deep gravity of what we're talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, I should have had lots of titles. I'll call you excellencies, whatever. It's wonderful to have you here. One of my jobs next week is the banquet speech for the Nobel Days, and there are so many different things to remember. Majesties and royal highnesses and viceroys and I don't know what. Last year I even included my wife. But in this case, I'll simply say, friends, what an honor to have you here. What is truth? They say we live in an era of post-truth. Well, asking questions about truth and relativizing truth can in some times and in some ways be well-grounded, because how something is perceived is often subjective, and it is important to listen to different stories. Maybe we will realize that what we took to be absolute truth has also another side to it. And yet, this way of thinking could lead us to some very dangerous places. It could lead us right into manipulation when people say, no, it did not happen, or what they are saying is only a fairy tale. We must remember that some facts are incontrovertible, and this very house that we are in is a testament to that. This is the story of what happened during the Second World War, and the way in which so many people and peoples were victimized. In this house lived the man who collaborated with the Nazi regime, and in many ways made the Nazi regime in Norway possible. And we are reminded by being gathered in this house that we must tell the stories and reveal the lies that thereby were perpetrated. This is especially important on behalf of those who were victims and are victims. It is all the more important that we respect their stories. And I, therefore, stand here in front of you with deep humility. Because, yes, I do represent the Nobel Committee. We have this year chosen to put the spotlight, not least, on the fate of the Yazidis. But it is not our story. It is your story. It is the story of those who have experienced it. And it is also the story of their tradition, of their religion, of your tradition and your religion. Let's make sure that we share these stories. Conspiracy theorists, ideologists, and those wanting to cover up their crimes around the world will always try to lie about what happened. The truth is, of course, that very serious abuse happens all over the world, and all too often, the weak and the already persecuted, and not least those representing vulnerable minorities, are singled out for suffering and humiliation. My good friend Evelyn Lindner has done a lot of work on the concept of humiliation, which is one of those dangerous mechanisms where you choose someone who is easy to make the victim, easy to blame. It is so easy to say they do not fit in, and we will humiliate them. And doubly that is dangerous, because on the one hand, of course, it leads to immense suffering and death. But on the other hand, it also creates this image of some people that are the ones that are really the masters. And they feel through this that we are now ruling this other people. How can we counteract this? Please, welcome. How can we counteract this? Well, this day is about exactly that, because only by telling the stories and documenting them can we build a foundation towards their end and towards justice. So also on behalf of the Nobel Committee, I'd like to acknowledge especially the journalists and the filmmakers who make sure that these stories are told. There are so many other stories to be told, and alas, too many choose the unimportant stories to be told. When you watch TV a regular evening, you would think that there are totally unimportant things that dominate our world, but that is not the case. We need to tell this story. Now, I am here together with you in many hats, figuratively speaking. We don't really wear hats anymore. But I have the hat of the Peace Research Institute Oslo, which proudly works also with the Holocaust Center on discussing and shedding light on the relationship between war and the plight of minorities. But as I said, I'm also one of the 5 members of the No. And our job is essentially to make sure that the will of industrialist Alfred Nobel, who died in 1896, is realized. There are many questions about why Alfred Nobel instituted the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, one of the stories that is told, and I'm not sure if it's absolutely true, but it's based in truth, is that a few years before he died, his brother died. And there was an obituary about his brother, but they thought that it was Alfred Nobel, the famous industrialist. So he could read his own obituary. And it said, "The merchant of death is dead." And he thought, is that how I'm reminded? Is that how people will think of me later? As the one who made weapons, as the one who made explosives, as the one who killed. And maybe that was one of the impetuses behind the Nobel Peace Prize. Many ask, why in Oslo? Why in Norway? Well, we don't really know because he never explained. But when he wrote his will, Norway and Sweden were together in a political union. And he probably thought that it would be good that one of the prizes could be handed out in this sister capital of Norway. And he chose for that the Peace Prize. He never explained why, but many historians guess that it's because Norway was slightly outside of power politics. And maybe that's important to remember, that we need to tell these stories in rooms where there is not some power player that decides who gets to say what, but where actually the stories are told, and where we give ample room for those whose stories we often won't hear because of the power structures of this world. So what is our reasoning behind this prize? Well, if you have read the announcement, you will know that the focus this year is on sexual violence in war. And Nadia Murad will share the prize with another wonderful and brave human being, Denis Mukwege from Congo. And they share it for their willingness to remind us of the terrible plight of women and children, and also many men, when they are subjected to sexual violence. This is humiliation in the extreme. But those of us who sit on the Nobel Committee are also very aware of the fact that when we give someone this prize, we shed a light on something. I've used that expression many times already, and it's a useful one, because it's about what things are in the dark that we need to know about. And I think there is no doubt that this year's prize does not only shed light on one problem, but on many interconnected ones. So where does the light fall this year? Yes, indeed, on sexual violence and sexual violence as a weapon of war. But it is also about the plight of minorities, on the plight of women and children in war, on the forgotten wars, on the terrible tragedies that happen that most people don't even know about. And it sheds a light on the dangers of impunity. Impunity meaning that people do terrible things and it has no legal consequences. But let me also say today that this year's prize sheds a light on the Yazidi. This is a chance to tell the story, and in 2 ways. Firstly, as a unique story. This is a story of Yazidis, but also as a representative story. As a representative story for minorities and people who have been persecuted all around the world. Now, as an academic, I see a certain ambivalence here, because on the one hand, I believe that these very important issues have to be discussed one by one, because if we take them all together, we won't really understand what is the key problem. then we'll just discuss conflict as a whole and we'll get lost. On the other hand, if we only discuss the discrete individual problems, we won't see that they belong within the larger picture. So the Nobel Committee, in all humility, tries to do a bit of both. Tries both to concentrate on something very specific and very concrete, but to put it into a larger framework. My friends, Alfred Nobel's will says that the prize should be given to those who have fought for the brotherhood of mankind. Let us include today's sisterhood. I think if he had written it today, he would have put it that way. For those who work to dismantle and take away weapons of war, standing armies, as he said. Well, if sexual violence is a weapon of war, this prize fulfills that. But the last criterion is peace congresses, the arrangement and convening of peace congresses where people come together to discuss peace. Ingvild and the Holocaust Center, that's what you're doing today. Well, the last thing I'll say is that on Monday, December 10th, we also mark the 70th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. Maybe one of the most important documents ever written. Many people think that that's why we hand out the Peace Prize that day, but that's not the case. It's handed out on December 10th because Alfred Nobel died on December 10th. And it says in the statutes that we are to hand out the prize on his death day. I wish he had died in July. So to all those of you freezing, I'm sorry, but we'll try to make it as warm and welcoming as we possibly can. One of my great heroes who unfortunately never got the Peace Prize is Eleanor Roosevelt. She coordinated the work of the committee, which wrote the draft for the Universal Declaration. And she put a lot of work into the very first line, where it said that all human beings have, well, you know the expression, inherent dignity. Dignity is important. That was already in the UN Charter. But the adjective in front of it is key, because this dignity is not something that another human being is given to you. It is a gift of nature. It is a gift of God. It is a gift that is there. And no one can ever take it away. So let's make this next week a celebration of inherent human dignity. Once again, it was great humility that I take part in this conference. Thanks to Ingvild and everyone here for the work you do, but not the thanks to all of you for taking part in this and for the work that so many of you do. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just need my
إبادة عوائل كاملة من الطائفة الأزيدية على يد عصابات داعش الإرهابية في انتهاك صارخ لحقوق الإنسان.
Thousands have fled in terror and are stranded on Sinjar mountain without food or water.
ISIL forces below have called for the systematic destruction of the entire Yazidi people, which would constitute genocide.
زما شكريا يا ربي زما شكريا زما شكريا يا ربي يا ربي دخيلك يا ربي تشتكي منها اشتريها مبرد عاونا نكره مساعدك مش مرة نكره
I can never see this without crying. Never. And I hope I never will. Sorry. And we have the honor of having also the director, the very famous international well-known film director of this movie, Navsham, here with us, coming directly from Germany, the director of the Black Massacre, but also the director of the new movie Toran, which is coming this year, which I also urge all of us to see. So a big hand to you. And now we will proceed. We are also so fortunate to and have the honor to have actually the chief analyst of the UN Commission on the Inquiry of Syria, Sareta Ashraf, with us, and also the very well-known researcher Valeria Cortelli, who also has been working together with Sareta at the London School of Economics, LSE, on the field of documenting genocide, not least the genocide on the Yazidi. And it's difficult to be academic in these situations, and I do apologize. I can see that it's also difficult for our first main speaker and speakers, but I would like to please give the floor to Valeria and Sareta. Yes, you can have your microphones. And we will have also a PowerPoint presentation. Peder, if you can take up the PowerPoint. And it's an honor to have you here. And as you all know, this commission on the inquiry of Syria was the first one really confirming that genocide had happened. And this was much thanks to the report that was in the safe hands of Sareta. So please, Sareta and Valeria, the floor is yours. A big hand.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here to present some initial findings of the Yazidi Victims Demographic Documentation Project that I'm co-leading with Sareta Ashraf. Sareta was the chief legal analyst of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Syria, and she was the lead author of a report entitled "The Came to Destroy," that has determined that ISIS violence against the Yazidi community of Sinjar amounts to genocide. Approximately during the same period when Sareta was conducting this investigation, I led a retrospective also survey in 13 camps for internally displaced persons in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where the majority of Sinjar surviving Yazidis now live. We interviewed a systematic random sample of 1,300 households and recorded information about killings and kidnappings of household members by ISIS. And by analyzing this data, we were able to estimate that roughly 10,000 Yazidis were either killed or kidnapped during ISIS attack. So the intent and extent of ISIS crimes against the Yazidi community of Sinjar is now known. However, the identity of all victims is yet to be established. So for this reason, Sareta and I decided to launch this Yazidi Victims Demographic Documentation Project, whose objective is to identify every victim of ISIS genocide against the Yazidi community of Sinjar. And we envisage that the consolidated database of victims that will result from this project will have multiple short, medium, and long-term uses. These include a data pool which can assist in identification of remains in mass graves, and which will provide reliable information for use in planning for and prioritization of members of the Yazidi communities, including provision of counseling, increased medical assistance, and gender and youth-specific services. We also envisage, and it is in fact an integral part of our methodological planning, that this documentation project will play a significant role in achieving justice for ISIS genocide against the Yazidi community. So the data from this project will ground existing advocacy for accountability processes in national and international court and tribunals. And once courts and tribunals are seized of the cases, then the project data will provide reliable information of high probability value. In fact, we're using a similar approach to the one previously adopted by the demographic unit of the ICTY, the International Criminal Courts for the former Yugoslavia. As some of you might know, the ICTY was the first international court to make extensive use of demographic expert report in high-profile trials, including in the case of Srebrenica. And in the longer term, we also hope that the documentation project will also serve as a historical record for recovery and reconciliation processes. So today, I will present to you some of the findings focusing on the case of the Yazidi village of Kocho, where Nadia Murad is from. Kocho was chosen to be the subject of this first demographic analysis because of the large number of Yazidi men, women, and children killed and kidnapped from this village, and because of the distinct timeline of ISIS attack on Kocho as compared to other areas in Sinjar, as Sarita will explain you in a minute. The demographic analysis answers the following questions. So what is the number of victims who can be identified by name? And what are the gender and age characteristics of the identified victims? And what is the likely number of victims who remain uncounted? As the project progresses, then we will conduct similar analysis for all Yazidi villages and the town of Sinjar. So this map shows you the Sinjar area. The town of Sinjar and 81 Yazidi villages are spread out around the base of Mount Sinjar. And as you see, Kocho village lies on the southern side of the mountain.
I'm going to speak very briefly about the architecture of the ISIS attacks on the Yazidis. I know many in this room will be very aware of the events of August 2014 and the events which then followed. But for those who are not, the ISIS attack on the Yazidis on the Sinjar region began in the early hours of the 3rd of August 2014 when ISIS fighters left bases in both Iraq and in Syria and converged on the Sinjar region. The attack itself was not tremendously surprising because there had been many earlier attacks around the fringes of the Sinjar region. And Sinjar lay between the Iraqi ISIS capitals, de facto capitals of Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria. And so it was always going to be part of what they termed their so-called caliphate. And it was also quite clear that the Yazidis were a group which ISIS would not countenance existing inside the areas in which they controlled, because they believed the Yazidis... It's not on?
Oh, okay, sorry. Did everyone hear me? I speak quite loudly anyway, so I think it's probably all right. It was quite clear from the outset that the Yazidis were in peril, because ISIS did not believe them to be people of the book. They believed them to be pagans and devil worshippers, and so they were uniquely endangered by the ISIS movement into Sinjar. As ISIS moved into Sinjar on both sides of Mount Sinjar, they attacked a region which contained hundreds of villages, many of them entirely Yazidi villages. But what we saw was first that there was very little resistance for them coming into the Sinjar regions, that the defenses of the Peshmerga forces collapsed almost entirely, and there was a withdrawal of the Peshmerga forces which wasn't adequately conveyed to the Yazidi community on the ground, with the many of the Yazidis then remaining in their villages without realizing that ISIS fighters were essentially walking through empty checkpoints. In some of these Yazidi villages, Yazidi men mounted a very limited offense using limited weapons, which was never going to be successful, but which was designed to allow their family members and women and children to have a little bit more time to escape. When ISIS came in, what we saw was that they experienced this very set pattern of violations, and those violations really depended primarily on the gender of the victim, and then secondarily by the age of the victim. And I think it's quite important that we saw this set pattern of violations that is repeated again and again across hundreds of villages on either side of a 100-kilometer mountain range of Mount Sinjar. The plan was extremely well orchestrated, including from the creation of holding sites in Mosul and Tel Afar, to the presence of, for example, diggers in some of the towns, which was used to cover the bodies of those who were executed, who were largely men and adolescent boys, in some cases older women past childbearing age. When ISIS attacked, there tend to be now three groups of Yazidis in terms of what happened to them, in terms of their their fate. One group, the largest group, actually was able to flee directly into Kurdistan, largely into around the Duhok area, and many of them now live in IDP camps. A second group, who were closest to Mount Sinjar, fled onto the top of Mount Sinjar, as you can see in the video, and by the 7th, statement by then US President Barack Obama occurs on the 7th of August, so only 3 days after the initial attack, 4 days after the initial attack was launched. So it was quite clear that there was quite a lot of information about what was happening on the ground already, in part because of Yazidi activists who converged on the State Department in DC in the intervening 4 days. Those who were on top of the mountain, many hundreds died on the mountain. They were under the August Iraqi sun with very little food and water, some of them having been injured as they were fleeing. But many of them were rescued by a combination of American and Iraqi airstrikes, but largely because of the action of the Syrian Kurdish forces, who opened a humanitarian corridor, which was about 3 kilometers wide and 12 kilometers long, from inside Syria to the mountain, evacuating many of the Yazidi men, women, children on top of the mountain. But there was another very large group who remained on the lower ground. That includes many of the villages, including Kocho village, who there were no rescue attempts for, and who were kind of left to their fate. And in those instances, what we saw, there was executions of men and boys, and older boys, adolescent boys largely. Women and girls over 9 were then taken first to temporary holding sites and then to larger centralized holding sites, where they were registered and eventually sold in a variety of different ways and distributed across ISIS-controlled territory. Although sexual enslavement and sexual violence has become, I think, and is an important facet of how the genocide was carried out. In fact, the women and girls were subjected to a large range of violations, including beatings, torture, starvation, and so on. And for boys who reached the age of 7, they were then taken from their remaining families and sent into ISIS training camps, where they were indoctrinated. And many of the children who've been rescued continue to suffer tremendous trauma as they try to return to their community and live with what has happened to them. So I'm going to speak just very briefly before we move on about Kocho. And these are some, you can leave it, it's fine. The reason we selected Kocho, as Valeria said, is Kocho has a very distinct timeline in relation to the other Yazidi villages. Whereas most of the Yazidi villages were cleared within about 72 hours of the initial attack on the 3rd of August 2014, in Kocho, the villages were kept inside the village until the 15th of August 2014, and there's a variety of explanations as to why that happened in that village. But on the 15th of August 2014, so they lived with the ISIS captors coming in and out, and there was some communication between the village elders and the ISIS commander in that region. But on the 15th of August 2014, a decision had been clearly made somewhere within the ISIS hierarchy, and they asked the Yazidis of Kocho to gather in the village school. Demanded that they were to gather in the village school. When they got to the village school, the women and girls and younger boys were asked to go into the first floor of school, while men and older boys were kept on the ground floor. They were then had possessions removed from them, and they were checked for possessions, the men first and then women later. And the men and boys were taken out in groups and never returned. As you can see, the first quote from one of the women describes the men and boys being taken out and not knowing what happened to them. In the intervening period, we found there have been at least 6 mass graves that have appeared inside Kocho, and it seems like the majority of the men and boys were executed shortly after being taken out of the school. The women and girls were then kept in the first floor, and from very early on, from within 2 to 3 hours of being kept in the school, ISIS fighters were coming in to remove probably the youngest girls, those between the ages of 13 and 16 were the first to be removed from the school. There was a tremendous amount of obviously trauma and violence as mothers tried to hold on to their daughters and were unable to do so. After that, the women and girls who remained were taken, and younger boys were taken to Sola, to a school in Sola, which is nearby, which is the temporary holding site for that particular area. And in that holding site, they separated the older women and girls, as you can see from the quote, women who were deemed to be past childbearing age, and those women were executed by shooting in the schoolyard of the school. And that is also a mass grave that has also been located, holding the remains of older women. They were then taken onto sites, central holding sites in Mosul and Tel Afar, where the continual registration selling of women were continued, as did the removal of young boys who were taken to ISIS training sites. So much of the documentation of that remains comes from women and girls who survived the genocide. And it's very important, I think, when we're looking at genocide, that we center the female experience of genocide as well as the male experience, which is often of the executions, which is privileged in our understanding of genocide. That it's important that women and girls aren't just seen as witnesses to genocide, but equally as survivors of genocide as well. And so I'll leave it.
So after August 2014, local authorities and a number of civil society organizations have attempted to compile a list of Yazidi victims of ISIS. And for this Kocho study, we analyzed data from two independent sources. The first source is a list of victims gathered by trained Yazidi enumerators, primarily from close family members and occasionally from more distant relatives, friends, and neighbors in camps for internally displaced persons in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And the second source is a list of victims compiled by one of the few Kocho's leaders who survived the genocide. Both this list recorded victims' first names, father's name and grandfather's name, their gender, age, and village of residence at the time of the ISIS attack. And the victim status, either rescue or dead or missing, is updated to August 2018, so 4 years after the attack. Now, neither of these lists is likely to be complete, but together they corroborate each other and provide more reliable evidence than each of them used separately. So the first phase of our analysis involved the detailed screening to assess data quality within each of these sources. So we first sorted victim names alphabetically and checked for possible spelling variants and ensure a uniform transliteration from Arabic to Latin alphabet. We also check the reported genders alongside victim names to verify consistency. We identified some digit preference and rough approximation in age reporting that is common in data collected through questionnaires, in surveys and censuses, especially in populations with the low literacy rate, and do not constitute a serious problem for the purpose of our analysis. After checking the data within the data quality within each source, we merge the screen data from the two sources using victim names to match the overlapping records. So this merging process led to 3 sets of records. A set of matched records of victims found both in the list from camps in Kurdistan and the list from the village leader. And then a set of unmatched records of victims found only in the list from camps in Kurdistan, and a set of unmatched records of victims found only in the list from village leader. So this merging process served to validate the identity of those victims whose names were reported in both lists. And then as a subsequent phase of the analysis, we validate the unmatched records of victims whose names were only found in one list. So we inspected records one by one to exclude the possibility that some victims were actually reported in both lists, but their names were not matched because of minor errors in first father's or grandfather's name. And we also conducted a detailed screening of existing lists of victims from other Yazidi villages and the town of Sinjar to rule out the possibility that some victims were erroneously reported as residing in Kocho at the time of the attack when they were in fact residing somewhere else. So this validation process led to a consolidated database of all identified victims of ISIS genocide in Kocho. Now, the actual total number of victims from Kocho is likely to be somewhat higher than the number of identified victims in our consolidated database. And there are a number of reasons why some victims might have remained uncounted. For example, some entire extended families could have been killed or kidnapped with no one surviving to report. Or survivors might have left Iraq before the list compilation activities started. So for this reason, the final phase of the analysis involved applying a dual system estimation to determine the likely number of victims who remain uncounted. This is a well-established statistical methodology that can be used when 2 independently collected incomplete lists of victims are available, like in this case. So without going too much into the technicality of the method, essentially the total number of victims can be estimated by comparing the size of overlap between the two lists to the size of the lists themselves. So if the size of overlap is small, this implies that the total number of victims is much higher than the number of victims identified in the list. If, on the contrary, most records are found in both lists, this implies that the total number of victims is not much higher than the number of identified victims in the list. So we can use this red formulas that you see there to get an estimate of the total number of victims from Kochos, including those not recorded in either list. So after screening and merging the list from camps in Kurdistan and the list from the village leader, we got a consolidated database of 1,161 victims from Kocho can be identified by name. There were 830 match records between the two lists, meaning that 830 victims were reported both in the list from camps in Kurdistan and the list from village leader. And in addition, there were the list from camps in Kurdistan included 51 records that were not included in the list from village leader, and the list from village leader included 280 records that were not reported in the list from camps in Kurdistan. So already our consolidated database confirmed that nearly the entire population of Kocho was either killed or kidnapped during the attack. And actually, the indiscriminate nature of the attack is also substantiated by the gender and age characteristics of all identified victims. As you can see in this graph, approximately 50% of all victims were males and 50% were females. And the age of the identified victims reflect Kocho's young population age structure. So about 25% of them were children under 10 years of age, and about 45% of them were under 20 years of age. Now, although ISIS targeted the entire community of Kocho, then the outcomes vary depending on the gender and age, as Sarita mentioned, and as I will show you in a minute. So of the 1,161 victims who we were able to identify by name, 611, that is approximately 53% only, had been rescued as of August 2018. The remaining 550, that is about 47% of all victims, were reported in the list still either dead or still missing. So this is the gender and age characteristics of the victim who had been rescued. As you can see, and as we have also heard from the testimonies of survivors, the most likely to be rescued are children, young children, and women, younger women. Very few adult men and very few older persons, either males or female, have actually survived. And this is the gender and age characteristics of the victims who are either reported as dead or missing in our consolidated database. So it's very likely that all the men and older persons reported in this category were killed, executed in August 2014. But as you can see, there is also significant numbers of children and young women who remain missing. And it is not possible until now to establish how many of those still missing are alive and what their fate is. So to estimate the actual number of victims, total number of victims, including those not recorded in either list, we can use this formula that essentially is the number of records in the list from camps in Kurdistan multiplied by the number of records in the list from village leader and divided by the number of match records between the two lists. So we get an estimate, a total estimate of 1,178 victims. Now this number is not much higher than the number of identified victims in our consolidated database, which is an indication of its high degree of completeness. And of course, as new evidence emerges and the identity of more victims is verified, we will update our database to include the new records. So to conclude, this consolidated database of Yazidi victims from Kocho that resulted from our first demographic analysis provide rigorous evidence that nearly the entire Kocho's population was either killed or kidnapped during ISIS attack in August 2014. And only about half of the victims have been rescued. And the most likely to survive were children and young women. Only very few adult men and older persons survived the genocide. And we've also seen that a significant number of children and young women are missing, and their fates remain unknown until today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll hear more from you in the round of discussion, which will start very soon. And now I have the pleasure of having Jackie Zalkberg also here with us and introducing her. She's Senior Human Rights Officer at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and she was also a leading analyst in the Inquiry Commission on the investigation on the Rohingya crisis. And so I'm really happy to have you here and to have your comments from a comparative perspective when you address the issue of genocide or other mass atrocities in that case. How did you experience this scrutiny as regards the concept of genocide? Please, Jackie.
Hi, well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. I'm very grateful to be here today and also to learn more in depth about the Yazidi case. I've not worked on Iraq at all. I'm an investigator with the fact-finding mission on Myanmar, and the findings of that fact-finding mission were published just this past September, where there was findings that in terms of what happened to the Rohingya, there were crimes against humanity, war crimes, and also the potential crime of genocide. And the fact-finding mission in our case on Myanmar didn't go so far as to make a determination that genocide had actually occurred, because it felt that as it wasn't a court of law, it didn't have the jurisdiction to make that finding. But what it did do was we looked at the information that we had gathered, and from the legal findings essentially made the determination that on reasonable grounds to conclude inferences of genocidal intent could be inferred, and that no other reasonable conclusion could be gathered from the information that had been gathered. So given that I think the audience today is potentially not as familiar with what has recently happened in Myanmar, maybe I thought I would just start with a little brief introduction. The Rohingya people are a Muslim minority that reside in Rakhine State, which is borders with Bangladesh. And for many, many years, they've been progressively marginalised and othered. And this has been through a series of legislative measures that have stripped them of citizenship, put them in, restricted their freedom of movement, limited their access to education, healthcare, and all sorts of other economic and social and cultural rights. So effectively, this group had been progressively marginalised and become increasingly vulnerable. There was a first wave of violence in 2012, which was very much described by the government of Myanmar as intercommunal violence between the Rohingya people and the ethnic Rakhine Buddhists of the region. Our investigation started at that point, and then I'll speak a little bit more about that later, but this was the first wave, which essentially led to the confinement of a large number of Rohingya in internment camps. They called them IDP camps, but essentially they were open-air prisons where they were unable to get out of and had very, very limited access to services. In 2016, there was a small uprising by the Rohingya Muslims themselves. They had created a small armed group and had a series of attacks on military outposts. And I think the attacks were very minor in scale. I think 9 military were killed. At that time, then the government retaliated with a series of what they call clearance operations, where as a result of that, approximately 60,000 people fled to Bangladesh. And it was at that time, a result of that first wave of violence, where these villages were targeted, rape was used as a weapon of war, and large numbers of killings, including mass killings, particularly of men, that the UN international community at the Human Rights Council decided to establish the fact-finding mission. And so when we were established, our intent and understanding of our mission was that we would predominantly look at what had happened in 2016 in Rakhine State, as well as there was another team looking at other parts of the country in the north, and I won't speak about that because I wasn't responsible for that part of the investigation. So it was August, and we were gearing up to start our investigation into what had happened over this period of 2 months in 2016, when ARSA, the Rohingya armed group, launched a second series of attacks. And then the government response came. And what we saw in that case was an incredibly systematic, organised and well-coordinated government response. And interestingly, what we also found was that the government response was clearly well-planned in advance. And so it makes you question how it was possible. I mean, they brought in to Rakhine State 3 weeks before these ARSA attacks on the military installations, more than 1,000 high-level, they're called light infantry division troops that are known for their brutality. And there was a series of what appeared to be intercommunal incidents occurring around a specific area, but that, you know, evidence that we gathered appeared to indicate that these were orchestrated to try and raise the tensions in the region, and may have even, forced ARSA to feel like they had to respond. So what we saw with the brutal response, which they renamed the clearance operations, which began after the period of 25th of August until well into September and even October, was very systematic attacks on Rohingya villages with no distinction between men, women and children. In fact, a systematic targeting of the population as a whole. And we were on the ground to investigate these attacks very much at the beginning because we were already in operation. And I think that was one of the unique things about the fact-finding mission, that we existed already. I mean, in many cases, the UN acts retrospectively, something happens, it comes to the international attention, and then a team is put in place to potentially go investigate. But we really were there at the beginning, and to truth be told, we had no idea what had happened. You know, there were only snippets of information coming out, but then this massive flood of refugees crossing the border. And while we didn't have access to Myanmar because the Myanmar government didn't allow us into the country, the fact that so many refugees had crossed the border and that we were able to speak to them in relative freedom, the Bangladeshi government allowed us to speak to them, meant that we had very first-hand access. And that feeling of speaking to people and having no idea what had happened, and then after a series of days starting to understand that this wasn't just refugees fleeing for humanitarian reasons, that these were actually systematic massacres happening not just in one village but in many, many villages, people arriving with bullet wounds, knife wounds, machete wounds, women who had been raped, and then, you know, also the people having suffered a very arduous journey from walking 10 days through the rain with all their children. And at the same time, we started to hear of a few sites where particularly egregious massacres had occurred. And I think at that time, what was also interesting was that Rohingya villages, they didn't have official names. So Rohingya speak a different language to the Myanmar, and it's not a written language. They were telling us about these places that we couldn't locate on any maps. And there was no official list that would enable us to understand what the Rohingya name for the village was. So in terms of documentation, it was very challenging. And so we had a whole process that took us months of working with Rohingya leaders in the camp to try and then establish a list. And what was very interesting was that through a series of missions to Bangladesh, where we conducted more and more interviews, that a very clear picture began to emerge of particularly egregious mass killings in certain locations, but also this pattern of killings and attacks in almost every village. And the pattern was as follows, that basically the military would come in, often very, very early in the morning, surround the village from more than one side, shoot randomly into the village, so people were getting shot. And often they were accompanied by local ethnic Rakhine. And these were the local Buddhists who had been very much encouraged to participate, it seems, and through a targeted, systematic approach of hate speech that had been disseminated through Facebook and other means of social media, you really saw that this understanding of Rohingya as dangerous terrorists that had really been deeply ingrained into these people. So some people were shot. In some cases, there appeared to be taking off of removal of men and boys for execution, sometimes in public, sometimes not in public. Some people do believe that men were taken off to be arrested, but it remains unclear because the amount of stories that we had of men being removed couldn't possibly be accommodated in the 1 or 2 jails that exist in that region. And women and girls were also subject to brutal mass rapes, sometimes in front of other people's, often gang raped and often mass gang rapes, which means that they were raped multiple times by multiple perpetrators in large groups. And this was sometimes happening inside police stations or military compounds. And then there was a systematic looting of the belongings. So what we saw as well was that goods were taken out of the homes. They were often put on military trucks by the local people, and then the houses were burnt. So there was really nothing left of many of these villages. And then the burning continued for a series of days. And through the use of satellite imagery, we also managed to demonstrate very clearly that these villages, there's absolutely nothing left anymore. And when we talk about coming to a conclusion of genocide, it really was an evolution of process. So we had these first testimonies. We needed to understand if what we were hearing was really true. There wasn't a lot of open source material at that time to have a sense of what we were doing. And so I think by the end we had conducted almost 700 interviews in Bangladesh of various people and corroborating the incident. So we had a number of corroborated incidents where in the report we clearly set out the story step by step of what happened in those villages, and in particular we sort of noted 5 of the most serious massacres, some of which it seems that hundreds and hundreds of people were killed in those places. But in a lot of places with smaller villages it appears that, very regularly between 10 and 40 people could have been killed. And then the numbers of killings en route is also something that remains very much unknown. So people may have died as a result of lack of access to medical care, which we would directly attribute to the government because they forced them, not to take the direct road to Bangladesh, but to walk through the mountains. And then there were actually killings at the border, which we also took as a sign of intent. If you're simply trying to push people across the border, why do you need to continually perpetrate violence against them, and in violence in a really brutal scale? The other part of the determination of genocide was looking at what's happened now in Rakhine State, so after the people crossed the border. And what's very interesting to see is what's happened to the land there. So after the people had left, and particularly in the most northern part, pretty much the entire Rohingya population has left of Mongdor. What we do see now is the final burning of all Rohingya villages. So if there were any remaining houses, those houses were burned, the bringing in of bulldozers, complete razing and flattening of those villages, the building of new, what they call model villages, which the government specifically has stated in policy documents are intended for non-Rohingya Buddhist minorities. So building houses that don't correspond to the traditional housing structures of Rohingya villages. Military installations, new roads, and so you can see some satellite imagery of villages where, the before and after picture, there's actually nothing left. It looks like a barren landscape where this was before a village of, hundreds of households. And some of these locations are places where we suspect there would be mass graves. Lack of access to Rakhine State by almost all interlocutors at the moment remains an issue of serious concern. I think the fact-finding mission has stated unequivocally that the question of returns right now is absolutely unviable, given that there's nowhere to go back to except for large-scale detention camps that they're building that are covered in barbed wire that would clearly not be any kind of meaningful voluntary return. So I think, I feel very privileged to have been able to be a part of something that, in a way, coincidentally, we were able to document so rigorously, so quickly, and really get those findings out there. And I think that, we can see the parallels with what's happened in the Yazidi case, and it was really impressive to hear, the first speech this morning from the Nobel Peace Prize of how important it is to tell these stories. And our mission was really a fact-finding mission, the legal determinations of whether or not the whole clearance operations would constitute genocide, or one of these massacres would be genocidal, and that could eventually be attributed to a perpetrator, will be the next step. And I'm hopeful that the UN is taking the necessary steps to establish the necessary legal mechanisms that would lead to that one day. But in the meantime, the benefit of the truth-telling, of the fact-finding, I think is enormous, and to get these stories out, particularly for communities who have had no hope. And I think one of the things that on a very personal level touched me so much was in Bangladesh, where people were telling you their stories and they were so grateful that someone was finally listening to them. And to be able to bring these stories to an international audience, to make sure that these things, we keep saying it, but do not happen again, but that there is some accountability then for what has happened. And so we've, in our report, the report was almost unique in that we listed the names of some of the most senior generals in the military, including the commander-in-chief. There has been a follow-on effect. There are sanctions in place, and now I think there will be a new mechanism set up by the UN to look into potential prosecution, and hopefully one day there will be a court with jurisdiction. There's a lot of immense pressure at the level of the Security Council for referral to the ICC, but of course there's geopolitical issues that come into that. But I think that this case is a really important one for us to take note of, that especially because I think, and probably similar to the Yazidi case, these types of things don't happen out of nowhere in complete isolation. It was a community that was increasingly marginalised, targeted, and we need to make sure that steps are taken at those moments in time, that we can make sure that it doesn't escalate to what we've seen in Myanmar. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jackie, also for that, bringing in that comparative and that horrible experience as well, and looking at the similarities and differences, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. But before that, let's bring us back to Iraq and to the Yazidi case. Zuhair, please come up, is one of the many who have traveled all the way to come here from other countries for this event, and we're so happy. From Iraq, from Germany, from Sweden, thank you to all of you. And you're based in Iraq, currently coming from Germany. You're working for an NGO. You call yourself proudly an activist, working on documentation. And I would like to ask you first, what is actually the situation now for the Yazidi in Iraq?
Thank you, thanks a lot. It's such a privilege to be amongst such people caring and feeling what genocide looks like, or what are the consequences of genocide. To answer to your question, I would rather reflect on what Yazidi feels, or what are the voices of Yazidis in Iraq back home. When the genocide happened in 2014, most of Yazidis, and even some of them so far, felt like this genocide would be like all the previous genocides. 72 previous genocides throughout the history. No one heard or no one documented about the crimes. So Yazidi felt disappointed, but when the Yazidis are nowadays seeing, especially women who have played a very strong role in the Yazidi case after the genocide of 2014. For example, we have Nadia Murad, we have Lamia, we have, I think, amongst the presence, we have Dr. Nagham. We have so many others who are taking the lead in bringing the case to the international community's attention. Of course, with the support of agencies and organizations as the organizers of this event, the Nobel Committee. I think these kind of occasions, these kind of endeavors are keeping the momentum to continue bringing the Yazidi case to the attention of the international community. And I cannot agree more with what Henrik said in his briefing. The Yazidi case is very representative, not only in Iraq, but also in the whole region. For example, in Iraq, if you go through like the recent history, not very old history, you would see what minorities have been through. For example, 80 years ago, the population of Jewish people in Iraq was more than 2% of the Iraqi population. But nowadays, you cannot find 0.1% amongst Iraq. This means we are losing not only the physical existence, we are losing the whole culture, the heritage of indigenous minorities in Iraq. 11 years ago, before 2003, the population of Christians in Iraq was more than 700 to 800,000 in Iraq. Nowadays, you barely find 250,000 Christians in Iraq. The population of Yazidis has remained with no increase, but somehow downscaled in Iraq after all those years because minorities are escaping from Iraq. I think bringing the Yazidi case to the attention of the international community would also help survival of the indigenous minorities in Iraq. I know you have a very tight schedule, so I don't want to take more time.
Thank you so much for that, and we'll hear more from Suhair later. He's attending the final panel after the lunch break, so we'll hear more from you. So thank you very much. Thank you. And now I have the pleasure of opening the floor for questions and comments. They should be as brief as possible because we all want to have time to talk, I think. And we'll also hear from, if you have questions for the introductory speakers, you may address them and they will hear from them afterwards. So we have people with microphones coming around. So please just raise your hands and I'll try to be as fair as possible. So yes, who would like to start? If there is a language issue, speak in your language and we'll find somebody to try to translate. Yes. Any questions or comments to this issue? Yes, we start. We have the first one here, the microphone, please, and then the second one down there. Yes, also, yeah. Please raise and say your name. And
hi, is it on? Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for all these presentations. My name is Silje Bryne. I work at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I would just like to ask the organizers and those present if you know of a fate of those women who are still missing, where they are now, if you have some information on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will collect a few questions and then we'll try to ask as soon as possible. Ellen, my colleague here, who's a specialist on on the Myanmar case in her genocide studies comparatively.
My question is perhaps to Sarita about the documentation of genocide against Yazidi. Could you elaborate a little bit on what other kinds of acts and just killings that may constitute genocide? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we have the next one here, please. I also have one here.
I was really impressed by the presentation provided by the colleagues from OSCHR. There was an inquiry mission who visited Iraq, as you said, and it was a very good summary of the inquiry mission. But according to my knowledge, I thought after the inquiry mission there should be an investigation committee as well to visit Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. I know there was the Security Council resolution who asked for the creation of an independent team to investigate and keep ISIS, holding ISIS as for the crimes committed against Yazidis in the region. Is that the same investigation team, or where OSCHR standing with regards to the after after the report of the inquiry mission. And I know that during a report, in the summary of the report provided by Human Rights Council, they clearly stated that ISIS has committed genocide against Yazidis. So where we are standing with that regards. Thank you.
Thank you. We will have possibilities of more discussion and more questions. I will give the floor to possibility to answer to Sarita and to Jackie, but on your way up, or if you like to get the microphone to her, I'll just say that the question for the Minister of Foreign Affairs, one of the big challenges is of course that there is too little documentation, and this is one of the issues that we address today. However, there is some documentation and some calculations, and Valeria and Sarita can develop on it, but there are different numbers, and also from Catherine Bamberger, we will hear from her later in the next panel, which, as you know, is about exactly that issue on the gender-based violence and the situation of the women. There are different numbers, but you have the numbers of approximately 2,000 women, and then again 800, 900 men in addition. So a total of approximately 3,000 includes the men. And of course, the horrible situation is that a lot of people do not know if their missing persons are alive or not. But I will leave for the experts on this issue to comment. So please also maybe Catherine, if you want to comment. But first, Sarita, please.
For the first question about what's happened to the missing women and girls, I think the short answer is it remains unclear. When ISIS lost territory, there were clearly a lot of airstrikes on military targets, and because many of these Yazidi women lived inside ISIS fighters' homes and in ISIS bases there, it's quite possible that some were killed in the airstrikes. There also continue to be rumors that they have been moved when ISIS fighters began to evacuate from Raqqa, for example, and from Mosul, with the most senior commanders going first, that the Yazidi women were moved with them. As ISIS has lost territorial control, there have been many positives to that, obviously, but one of the negatives is that we have the visibility of where they are, and the people that they're holding, who are mainly women and children, has become obscured. So I can say that the pace of rescues has slowed tremendously. Very few people are being rescued now, but the question of where the remaining and missing women and children are remains an open one. For Ellen's question, in relation to acts of genocide, one of the things that in the popular imagination of genocide, people conceive of genocide as really being composed of organized mass killings, and that comes from being steeped in images of the Holocaust, but also for those who arrived at this field of study more recently, the Rwandan genocide. So essentially root and branch genocides where there has been an attempted total annihilation of the protected group, and that's largely done through mass killings. But in fact, genocide, as originally conceived by Raphael Lemkin and then as enshrined in the Genocide Convention, recognizes that genocide is an attempt to destroy a protected group in whole or in part through a range of often coordinated acts. And in the case of the Yazidi genocide, when the Commission of Inquiry in Syria was doing its investigations, one of the things that became extremely clear was that all 5 of the prohibited acts had been used by ISIS in order to attack the Yazidis. And that attack occurs in a number of different ways, but what we saw was the leveraging of essentially gender roles to maximize the destructive impact on the group. That you saw men being attacked in their roles as protectors, of patriarchs, of village leaders, of religious leaders, whereas women and girls were attacked essentially as mothers, daughters, symbols of honor of the community, holders of life of the community, and because of their role in the regenerative force of the community. So the first prohibited act of genocide is killing members of the protected group. And that is really the privileged act of genocide, in the sense that international community, the Security Council, other states are more likely to recognize genocide where there have been mass killings. It's also the case that where genocide is being prevented, or where there are steps to prevent genocide, one of the things that is taken as the warning sign of a serious risk of genocide occurring are killings. And you can see that in the President Obama's statement in the White House, that he talks about averting a potential massacre on Mount Sinjar. And the rescue operations were then sent in to rescue the people on top of the mountain, but there were no rescue operations for the people who were left on lower ground. So yes. So the final thing is that when it comes to killings, genocidal killings, they're also much more likely to be prosecuted as genocide in any trials which follow. So if you look at Srebrenica killings in ICTY, but also if you look at what happened in the Rwanda cases in the Rwanda tribunal, you'll see this movement towards killings being prioritized in genocide indictments and genocide prosecutions. In the Rwanda tribunal, this became a phenomenon that the prosecution weren't even investigating or indicting sexual violence at all or as genocide. And it was up to actually a feminist coalition of NGOs and activists who forced, through an amicus brief, forced sexual violence onto the indictments, and is the reason why in the 1988 Akesu case that you now have this view of sexual violence being part of genocide. But the other four acts are causing serious bodily and mental harm. And there's a variety of jurisprudence about what that means, but it certainly includes rape and other acts of sexual violence, which are seen to cause both bodily and mental harm, torture, enslavement, and a group of other inhumane acts, which covers a range of violations. And the second is inflicting conditions of life. That is a longer one, but it's essentially inflicting conditions of life that are meant to cause a slow death. So it comes out of essentially starvation campaigns, the concentration camp cases where people they're being put in positions where they are not likely to survive. So we saw that on top of Mount Sinjar, where the Yazidis were essentially besieged, but also the conditions under which Yazidi women and children were held captive, where they were held with very little food, little water, little heating, little light, and with very little access to medical care. And that was actually one of the things that ISIS was attempting to do, because it was not intending the Yazidi women and girls would ever leave, but would essentially die very slow deaths within ISIS captivity. The fourth is imposing measures to prevent births within the group. For the Yazidis, because the Yazidis require both the mother and father of Yazidi children to be Yazidi, the very act of separating men and women and of killing the men isn't a measure imposed to prevent births, but simply holding the women, taking the women, and also putting women in a position where they may become pregnant with where the father is not Yazidi is by itself also a measure imposed to prevent births. And then fifth, you have forcibly transferring children from one group to another group. And in this, you see the transfer of young Yazidi boys who are then have their Yazidi names stripped from them, given Muslim names, heavily indoctrinated, and then sent into training camps to fight as the movement is basically moving from being Yazidi, having their identity as Yazidi stripped from them, and an alternate identity being placed upon them and bringing them within essentially the perpetrator group as being the fourth act. So all those acts work together. They actually are a mechanism of moving parts towards a common goal of annihilation, and that's what we saw with the Yazidi genocide. And just for your comment, UNITAD has been set up, which is the UN investigative team for accountability against Daesh. Whilst the Commission of Inquiry was set up by the UN Human Rights Council, the UNITAD is being set up by the Security Council. So it is a separate entity, but it will draw from the work that has already been done. There's not necessarily going to be a reinvention of the wheel. As to whether staff cross over, I think there's a number of people in the UN that have been working on Iraq for a long time. The Syria Commission only really worked on this report. But I would imagine that they will be pulling in people, one, who have experience in Iraq, but who have particular experience in putting together criminal cases and working on trials, which is a separate kind of expertise.
Thank you very much. And then, Jackie, do you want to comment on the question? Sorry? Oh. Definitely, and that is definitely, it's Kurdish, right? Yeah. So we will have some. Thank you very much. We will have the question translated, definitely. Yeah, we can have the question. Did anybody else want to answer the questions from the first round? No? This is good. Catherine, do you want to develop on the number of women?
I can say it when I speak.
Or we can just do it now. Yes, at least from your database.
Just very
Catherine
quickly.
Bamberger from the International Commission of Missing Persons.
Yes. So very quickly, yes, the number, the estimate is about 3,000 missing, but that really is an estimate coming from NGO sources. There's also another estimate of the number of mass graves and single graves, in other words, clandestine graves related to missing persons. And that number, I've heard, hovers around 70 mass graves, and the rest are single graves, which may be up to 200 in total. But again, these are estimates. This has to be verified. Others died escaping, obviously, as we saw, and going to Mount Sinjar. So there are bodies lying on the surface, and some of those have been collected. So those are other cases where there are missing persons. And as Saretta just said, there are children that were taken away from households, maybe still alive, living in other households, or women who are living as sex slaves, still living in other households, who are missing. And then, of course, there are those who are fleeing Iraq, and I'll talk about that also in my presentation, who are part of the movement of individuals coming to Europe, some of whom have died in the Mediterranean, some of whom are now in Europe. So the numbers are very big, and it's a very complicated process, and I hope we can uncover this at some point.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And then we'll pass the microphone to the question over there in Kurdish, and we have, if you like to translate, or otherwise we have a translator here. So we will have the continuous translation. Can we have also one microphone here, please? The other microphone here. So you raise your question.
This is not a question.
Oh, comment. Yes, please. You're so welcome. But please keep it as short as possible.
Okay.
And please present yourself. And also, please make a stop after 1 minute, and then we'll have the translation into English.
باش سپاس بو براسي قالك كيف ما كنت بدك كده بنين اف خلكي ما بدك كده اهتمامك ما ظن داتا جينوسايد ازديا هي فيت كاين بتر اهتمام بدني وبتر مدفيا بتر راغاند بدك كده وبت ياد يش
Hello. He says it's very important. We value such events. I think it's off, right? We value such events, and as you can see, the presence here is also like proves that it's a very valuable event, and we hope that you continue such events because it's a hope. But أود فيها تخوب دي ناس يجي
از داود خطاری ما دکمنت کاری جنوساید ما هاتانو که 4000 لاپر ما جنوساید او کری و 400 ویدیو جی ما او کری دکمنت تمامی ما او کری جنوساید ما دکمنت کری.
He's Daoud Khatari from Iraq. He works on documentation. He has thousands of pages on documenting the crimes and the names of the victims.
احصاءات بنافاو هر ضحيه كي هطانو 7424 ضحيه ميت دوكومنت كرين.
He has the statistics, and the statistics that are in his hands reflect on more than 7,000 individuals who have been victimized in one way or another.
هر قربانيك هر ضحية كيدر كي وهر فايلك كامل مواجهة تشيكري كتشبسرياتيا كيدر كي ويا تشاوايا بيستو إك خالة ما براوت تشيكرين هريكي خالوي توي ما دوكومنت وحموية تشيكرين دا قرباني درستي بينا ديار كرن.
Each victim has a single profile that reflects on up to 20 points, if I'm not mistaken. 21 points reflecting on different information on the victim.
أو قرباني ديسا محموكا وتصويتوان جيتين إيكو تصويتوانا إذا كو بيجن مثلا قرباني توان كيمن أن ناوي بتكرن بل كون قالك جاي دي إحصاءات إن بس جمارة أنا أذهني تصويرن نافن بحموشتن تكرن.
And the profile has also the pictures of the victims.
هشتي وهشت مقبرة ما بيتين أو جحمو ما يدوكومنت كين أو يش مقبراش خلاص وين ما شاف في كفتين قال خرا كين دوكومنت فيديو تصوير نفيسين هشتي وهشت مقبرنا
مقبرة
جماعي
88 mass graves that we are aware of.
أو مقبرنا مخر التصوير كين يتي بشكل كي عام ديتا براسي ما قالك هول داينا كو عم ذاكي بس هطانوكا هيش هاريكارية كبوما نهات يشت لا الدوليفا أو مقبرنا بين ذكرن.
We also have pictures of all those mass graves, and we are enthusiastic about opening those mass graves, but of course with the support of the international community.
شو اهتمامك الدولي بان مقابرانينا حموت هاتني اهمال كرن شو الريكو بيكيكش كبورانيات يكرنو قالك ام داخوازيت كاين ليه هطانو كات شو كسن اف مقبرنا او نشانه جينوسايد.
In terms of mass graves, we see that there's the care for those mass graves is actually less than needed, and there's no international support for caring or protecting those mass graves that we see that are the symbol of the genocide.
ما ملف بيك في جينوسايد ما كامل كري مدفيتا ورجينا چندین زمانه داكو دنيا خرب بزانت كابتشي بسري مهاتيا افهرفت نشك از تقارنو كايكو بو بيجن هف مجلدات.
So those files we are keeping them. We are trying to have them translated in different language so everybody can access and have information about. And he can also reflect on those 7 files.
يا اكيد اخذت رجعوا لي شي بسري خلكيات يا تشاور رافينا وشتوان او كاسيت شايدات مرينو وباراب تجتينا وبرسادات وكذا شي بسري وان هاتيا هذا هنيا ايكي باش دويش هرب نفسها ودا كخلكي ما تريد ترجمه.
The first part reflects on the first influxes of Yazidis from Sinjar, what types of sufferings they've been through, and where did they go, like detailed information on how they escaped from the area.
يعني باش دويجي اري خلكي مش مقاومه كر بسلاحك بسيط او كرن 7000 كيلومتر 7000 كيلومتر بو 7 كيلومتر بون لداعش حمو قوات اخواتي چونك خلكي ما ايمانك بعرضي هبو نقار يك بوستش شي بسطينن او حموم او شرط ودا كده حمو ما الدوكيمنت كرين اسخوش من نافواندات شريده ما الدوكيمنت كرين.
Yazidis themselves tried to resist when there was ISIS attack on Sinjar, and but it was 7 kilometers, and ISIS increased the amount of military attacking the militants attacking the area. That's why Yazidis on their own could not defend and stay.
كتاب مجلدات دوي او سر كوچويا 6000 لاپرا سر كوچو ما او كدي.
The second file is 6,000 pages, especially on Kocho.
كوچو جيب حمو بالدوكيمنت كوكو اشوك خلق كوچو اصدنا في خلق كوچو دا هردم لودر كده اتناف مقبره تواندا 22 مقبره بس مال كوچو هين.
So he's being close to Kocho. He's been there and documenting and taking pictures, and he knows that there are 22 mass graves only in Kocho.
بالتنت كوچو دا 1208 كاس قربانينا.
Only in Kocho there are 1,208 victims, individuals.
يا كتابة مجلدة سي سر مقابر الجماعينا مقوتوا سر مقابر الجماعي مقابر الجماعي بتفاصيلي أمي تشوينا نافدا وكيت داو خلقك أبيش بن مقبرة در كفتينا درش مجزرة در كفتينا درة ما يتبيني بدك كي مخر الدوكومنت كرين فيديو كاو تشيب سريواناتي وتشواو كرينا.
The other document is especially on mass graves. He has been interviewing those survivors who survived the mass graves, who were wounded under the bodies, and afterwards he has been able to talk to them and take their testimonies.
يا شاري زاروكت ما چونك زاروك شتكي جالكي جرينجا وقت دست داعش دا تشيب سريوانات تشاول سوكا عبيدات فروتن او زاروكنا ما شافي كفتني قالوان حمو زاروكا كرين تقريبا 400 لا باري بس سروان زاروك او زاروك دست داعش دار كفتني داره ما شويه ما الودر كده ما شافي كفتني قال حمو كاكرين او زاروكنا تشي ايش وازار ونخوشتوان ما حمو الدوكيمنت كين دي مجلد ده.
The other document is specialized on the children. The children who survived the captivities, we were trying to maximize the details in that document. We have interviewed all those children, and we have put information about each.
مجلدة يا بينجي أو سر خشكت ما يكوج دست داعش در كفتينا تشاوت چنجارات نفروتن چنجارات نقتصاب كرن شيء إيش وآزارت واندي ده إكشوان خشكا ما نجلا وان بوشكن حموت در كفنا دري أتشم لقاء الخرج حموت كم يك دست ما بنارس لقاء الجل حموت كين.
The other document is all about the female survivors, girls and women. He has taken testimonies from all of them and put all the information in them. Yes.
And that is excellent as an introduction for the next panel, because that's addressing the issue of women. So thank you so much for that. And maybe we can hear, please translate, more from you about the documentation of violence against women in the next session, because that's also a very important topic that we will address after the coffee break. Can you please translate?
بيجي تقلق أف موضوع تبيجي قلق مهمة عم خوجي بقدر دانن وقلق جريدا مناقشات الميد بيدا الويري عم دي قارن بتر باش مناقشة بكن.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And now, as you may know, we will have more coffee and tea, but I will introduce a person, can you get Stefan inside from here, that you will have the chance to meet during the coffee break, because I have this groundbreaking new technology here, which actually takes you to Lalish. It's a VR, the first worldwide ever production, with not only the most excellent 360 photos I have ever seen, taken by Stefan Olan, 20 of them, taking you to Lalish and taking you to the refugee camp of Eshan nearby Badre, two places I was so fortunate to visit some weeks ago and which Stefan visited this summer as a part of this project of the Minority Network. Working closely together with Sahavi Sanjavi, who's on his way here now from Stockholm, the film director. You've already seen two of his films on Lalish, and also I will then ask you to go to Stefan during this first coffee break and try to get this glasses on. It takes a long time to see all of it. So since we are so many, I think that we should be fair and take just one of the tour. Pick either Lalish or the refugee camp, okay, at this point. You will also be able to do this during the lunch break. We have 5 sets of glasses. This is a pre-showing of this. It's only for you. They're not available anywhere because we continue working on them. There's some minor technical things and they will be launched next year. However, the 360 tours that are now in the glasses with sound effects and films baked into them are available on the 360 tours online that are being launched in this very room on Sunday at 2 o'clock. Available to everybody all over the world. Every Yazidi, every other person can from Sunday 2 o'clock go to Lalish, visit Baba Chawish, and he has seen these films and he was very happy. That was one of the reasons I went to Iraq, to show it to him. So he has approved that this is good. So please, a big hand to Stefan Olan. He's out there waiting for you. 15-minute coffee break. So we'll start with the topic of documentation of missing persons, and we are so fortunate, as you know, to have with us Catherine Bamberger, who is the Director General of the International Commission on Missing Persons, who will give us a brief overview both of their work and of the situation regarding documentation and the challenges in that respect. So please, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ingval. Can everyone hear me? I feel like a spaceman with this. Get up on it. So I'll just wait 1 second till everyone's seated, but I'll try to be quick. So thank you very much, Ingval, for inviting me here today. This is a fantastic event. It's Knut Volbeck, who's one of our commissioners, I think made the initial introduction. ICMP is an intergovernmental organization established by a treaty. Although we were created 22 years ago to deal with the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, we are now a treaty-based international organization since 2014. And we've been working in Iraq for the last 10 years. So there's a lot to talk about. But I think my presentation today will be largely geared towards the Yazidi community itself. So I want to do a little bit of outreach as well, and to talk about the program that we have in Iraq and how we can assist you. But first I want to put the issue of missing persons in context. Missing persons is not only a problem for the Yazidi population, for Iraq, but it is a global challenge. There isn't one country in the world that doesn't have a problem with missing persons. They're missing from war, they're missing from human rights abuses, including those who were forcibly disappeared, including those missing from genocide, and I'll talk a little bit about Srebrenica. They're missing from organized violence, which is also a category within Iraq and also pertinent to the Yazidi population. They're missing from disasters, and they're also missing from migration, which also affects the Yazidi population. A bit of demographics, building a little bit on what Valerie said earlier. The majority of missing from armed conflict are men, and we can pretty much in 2018 say that with some conviction. We know that for a fact in the context of the conflicts of the former Yugoslavia, where we use DNA testing, which I'll talk about, to identify the victims. In the context of Bosnia-Herzegovina, almost 90% of the missing were men, which means when we talk about survivors, we're talking about women and children. And when we're talking about securing the rights of survivors to justice, to truth, and to economic reparations, we are largely talking about female survivors. In the context of Iraq, the numbers are staggering. They could be up to 1 million people missing. So the reports vary between 250,000 to 1 million persons missing from the regime of Saddam Hussein, from the war with Iran, from the first Gulf War, since the invasion, whatever you want to call it, after 2003, and from, of course, Daesh crimes most recently. So the numbers are huge in Iraq. And also in Iraq, again, with the exception probably of the Yazidi population who are missing, the majority are men. In the specific case of the Yazidi population, women were targeted specifically and have disappeared in larger numbers than is the case globally. So it's important to note that. But also with regard to Iraq, which is common in most other countries, the majority of missing are civilian populations. And of course, that is the case with the Yazidi population. In fact, when we look at World War I, having just moved away from November 11th, the majority of those that were casualties of war in World War I were combatants to the tune of 7-1. In the former Yugoslavia, the majority of those missing or those who were dead or killed were actually civilians to the tune of 10-1. So the ratio of civilians missing and dead as a consequence of armed conflict has changed over time. What has also changed over time, and this is very important when we start talking about UNITAD and also the law on missing persons in the context of Iraq or mass grave sites, which I'll talk a little bit about. There's been a shift over time from ad hoc efforts to account for missing persons. If you look at the Titanic, when the Titanic went down, persons were searched for by the company that owned the Titanic. So these were ad hoc efforts. With the establishment of the Geneva Conventions, you move on to a humanitarian process where persons are supposed to be protected from disappearing, but protection fails. Protection failed in the case of Srebrenica. Protection is failing in Syria today. Protection failed with the Yazidi population, so it fails. But also warring parties are supposed to share information on the location of sites, and that is not happening in the case of Iraq. What happened in the 1990s is now represents a historical shift for how we account for missing persons and how we hold governments to account for searching for missing persons. And this is very important in the context of Iraq and elsewhere in the world. With the establishment of the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia, its counterpart in Rwanda, the creation of the ICC in 1998, you have a different approach to missing persons. You have a rule of law, human rights approach, which I hope doesn't end in this world today, because that is also under threat. But that is a very big shift in how persons are accounted for. ICMP itself was created in 1996 specifically to deal with the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, where today we were able to account for over 70% of the 40,000 persons who went missing. And that is unprecedented. That's never happened before. And we believe that one of the underlying reasons why that happened is not only because ICMP was created, obviously, but because other factors were at play. And a big one was, of course, holding governments to account for finding missing persons, and the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. This was a very important factor in holding perpetrators to account and initially excavating large numbers of mortar remains that were found across Bosnia. So this is a very important development. As we look at Iraq now, what's very important, in 2006, ICMP assisted the Iraqi government in creating a law on the protection of mass grave sites. In 2015, that law became the Law on Mass Grave Affairs. That law prescribes how mass graves in Iraq are protected and also how they are investigated. Because the issue of missing persons is a cross-cutting one, because the circumstances, as I illustrated before, are numerous in which persons go missing. There are multiple institutions in Iraq or any country that sets up the mechanisms for accountability to find missing persons. So different ministries or institutions play a role. For example, in Iraq, according to the Law on Mass Grave Affairs, under Article 6, there is a committee that was established to protect mass graves and to search for missing persons or investigate their disappearances. That committee consists of the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Justice, some of you know it potentially, yes, so I'm already repeating what you know, the Ministry for Martyrs in federal Iraq, the Ministry for Martyrs for UNFAL in the KRG, and other ministries. And this is important because, again, it's a cross-cutting issue. And in accordance with the Law on Mass Grave Affairs, a judge is appointed by the High Judicial Council to take the lead role in conducting or issuing an order to be able to excavate mass grave sites. In the case of Sinjar, this has actually happened on 2 occasions, one in 2016 and one in 2017, and yet nothing has happened so far. And as we all know, there was also a scheduled excavation that was supposed to take place on November 1st, but that also has been postponed. But the committee must work together with all of its members for this to take place. And this is very important when you're looking at large numbers of missing persons, to have a sustainable process in Iraq to account for potentially up to 1 million missing persons. Adherence to domestic law is an important foundation for establishing that sustainable process. But at a second stage, and we encourage Iraq to do this, Iraq should think about setting up some kind of centralized institution that is capable of searching for all missing persons, regardless of their ethnic, religious, or national origin, their sectarian origin, whatever minority group they happen to be part of, and that Iraq secures the rights of all surviving families of the missing, again, regardless of their ethnic, religious, national origin. But this is not happening in Iraq yet, but these are the stepping stones. Iraq is also a signatory to the Convention on the Protection of Persons from Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. This is extremely important for Iraq. In fact, Iraq's signature to that convention allowed the convention to come into force in the world. Therefore, Iraq has certain obligations now under the law, and ICMP is assisting Iraq in creating implementing legislation in its domestic legislation so that it can adhere to the convention. That convention is very important because, again, it prescribes how the state is supposed to account for missing persons. ICMP's mandate, in fact, as an intergovernmental organization, is to ensure that Iraq accounts for all missing persons in an impartial manner. Another change that occurred over time, and now as we're looking at the context of Iraq, is the use of modern forensic genetics in being able to identify missing persons. And this will be a very important factor when one gets to the point where excavations regarding Sinjar take place. Using DNA-based or scientific methods to identify the victims, in other words, to provide irrefutable evidence of their identity, is not only important for the surviving families of the missing, but it's important in securing their rights, again, to justice. Evidence regarding DNA identifications can also be used in criminal trials, and ICMP has provided such evidence in over 30 criminal trials, and I'll illustrate how that happens. But this is a very interesting point, and I think one that we need to talk about, especially with those of you here. In the context of the former Yugoslavia, to account for such a high number of missing persons, meaning almost 30,000 of the 40,000 persons who went missing,
ICMP had to collect data from 100,000 families of the missing to be able to match it to mortal remains that were found in 3,000 mass grave sites, which we assisted in excavating. So the role of the families in this process cannot be understated. Number one, in building their capacities to address this issue and empowering them, educating them about what their rights are, and educating them about how the process works in Iraq, and then educating them about how DNA works, and ensuring that whatever data they provide, whether it's to a local Iraqi government official or to an international organization, that they have the right to choose whether or not they want to provide that information. That information should be provided voluntarily by families of the missing with their written, informed consent. You cannot just go out in the field and just take data. One has to work with families of the missing very carefully so that they understand that the data they provide ultimately belongs to them. And if they want that data back, they have every right to get that data back. And they have every right, they are in the driver's seat regarding how that data will be used in the future. So this is a very important point to make with families of the missing, and I know some of you are here represented today. Now I want to talk about data, and this becomes important. I've only brought a few of these brochures here with me, and I just would like to give them out because I do consider this a little bit of an outreach talk today with especially the Yazidi community here. In order to find large numbers of missing persons, not only do you need, of course, a proper rule of law approach that allows for investigations into missing persons cases, you also need, and we highly recommend using DNA as the foundation to be able to make scientifically based identifications, but you also need large quantities of data, okay? Data is coming from a variety of points. It's coming from the mass grave site. It's coming from families of the missing. It's coming from the mortuary. There also could be children that are alive. So this is not only about missing and dead. Reuniting families using DNA is extremely important. But centralizing that data capacity is critical to the process. Right now, what happens in Iraq is each one of these ministries, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Health through the Medical Legal Institute in Baghdad, or its counterpart in Erbil, or the Ministry for Martyrs in federal Iraq, or the Ministry of Anfal in KRG, all have data silos that don't speak to each other. And in order to find such a large number of missing persons, the data that's held by these institutions must be centralized, and that because it has to be matched to each other. So I'll show you and I'll illustrate how that works. So centralizing data under a central body and protecting that data will be critical to the future of finding missing persons. This chart just illustrates ICMP's data systems, which we've made available to Iraq, but we're encouraging Iraq to centralize its own capacities. So you can see here, I don't know if all of you can see it, and if you can't see it, I have the brochure, which I can hand out. But the first component of this data is data coming from the families of the missing, where they provide data about themselves, and then they provide data about the person who is missing. What did that person look like? What were they wearing? When did they disappear? Who were they last seen with? Is there witness information affiliated with that disappearance? Was there a criminal act affiliated with that disappearance? So that's what we call missing persons data. Another component of this data is the relatives application, where families of the missing provide genetic reference samples to be able to use for future DNA purposes. But again, this is done through the written, informed consent of the family of the missing. There's another application that deals in the case where persons are deceased with the mortuary, conducting anthropological examinations and pathological examinations. Do I have much more time? Okay, good. All right, because I'm getting to the most important slide. Data also regarding how field operations are conducted, excavations in the field. So when the Sinjar excavations take place, which they are, I think, going to be scheduled for early next year, properly excavating mass grave sites to a level where that evidence can be provided for criminal trial purposes at international courts is going to be important. So that's another component. The laboratory management system is the final component. Being able to do all of this could end up in a situation like this. And I don't know if all of you can see this,
But this man is a victim of another genocide, an earlier genocide, the genocide of Srebrenica from 1995, where 8,000 men and boys were taken away for 3 days. They were executed, and their bodies were buried in multiple mass grave sites in eastern Bosnia, which you can see here on the left. They were, this is very important, yes, sorry, because I just, for all of this audience here, these, you can see here, using DNA, we were able to find these victims from Srebrenica because the perpetrators had gone back to the original mass grave sites, removed the bodies from the primary sites, and put them into multiple secondary sites. So using DNA was the only way to identify these victims. What you see here is the average Srebrenica victim, where it took at least 7.1 DNA match reports to identify one person, because these body parts were found in multiple locations, sometimes 11 different sites, sometimes 50 kilometers away from each other. Just to conclude, in the case of Srebrenica, in the case of Sinjar, and those missing from Daesh crimes, when excavations are conducted of the mass graves, this is the level of identifications we want to see. And I'm sorry if this is disturbing, but this was the evidence we provided in the Karadzic trials and the Mladic trials, and eventually led to convictions of genocide. So thank you. That was the quickest. No problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Catherine. And this is really important and very interesting to all of us to learn. Yes. And also, please visit their website to learn even more. And if you like, we can maybe share your wonderful slides, also make them available on our new online resource. Then it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce the next speaker, who is Nagam Nausat, who's a gynecologist at the Survivors Center in Dahuk. And I'm so happy that you're here to share your experiences and reflection on this important topic of the documentation and effects of the violence against women. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for convening these important conversations about documentation of the gender-based violence in the context of the Yazidi genocide. As you know, the Yazidi are a small minority. They have been living in the northwest of the Iraq for at least thousands years. In the summer of the 2014, they have been subjected to genocide committed by ISIS. Almost all of the Yazidi community has filled the Sinjar area to Kurdistan. The majority of the Yazidi are now living in Kurdistan as internally displaced people, where they are either unable or unwilling to retain their homes and lands in Sinjar because they feel they are not protected. It is absolutely critical that the story of the Yazidi women and girls be told accurately and safely told and transmitted to the world. They must be heard. As a doctor who has treated 1,200 of the survivors since 2014 till now, and learned in great details about their kidnapping and slavery, it is my obligation to document both their narratives and their trauma in the most caring, respectful, and scientific way possible. The terrible event of 2014 changed my life overnight. I was called to treat those who has escaped, and the past 4 years have been a continuing nightmares for my people. So my life was turned upside down. I helped to start a clinic, the Women's Survivor Center in Duhok. And we have provided holistic care to hundreds of the women and girls captured and enslaved by ISIS. The girls and women I meet today, they feel they have no future. They have been raped, beaten, mutilated, terrorized, forced to bear children when they were only children themselves. They have seen their loved once killed in front of their eyes. At the Women's Survivor Center, women and girls waken and they don't speak. When they arrive, they cannot even look at me. They think I am a stranger. They think I am not one of them. Growing up, I never thought about my ethnicity and religions. I knew I am Yazidi. But in the clinic, I see these girls, these women. I tell them I am Yazidi too. They lift their gaze to look at me, and that's where our journey together began. I don't need to tell you about the horror story, about the boys expelled from their homes, who died of starvation and exposure, and about the girls stolen from their families, sold into sexual slavery 5, 10, 20 times. I see the pain in the face of the 6-year-old. I told her, "What's wrong?" She told me, "I want nothing, only one glimpse of her mother." After treating this patient now for years, I have understood that an additional part of my medical obligation must include the detailed documentation of these cases for purpose of accountability and justice. None of us can imagine the physical and mental trauma that these atrocities have caused. The first part of this process must be the acknowledgement of the violation through enabling the survivor to tell their story and to have the priority and safely recorded with their full informed consent in the most professional manner possible. The survivor must always be the owner of this information, first and foremost, and one of the biggest barriers to this process is the fear and stigma in the community that is associated with the sexual violence. Most of my patients also do not even have the words to describe what was done to them physically. But as a doctor, I have a special skills to collect their medical histories and to evaluate the physical and mental traumas my patients have suffered. Of course, I must also address their immediate health risks and concern. The documentation of the violence perpetrated against these women and girls should be preserved and safeguarded with the medical confidentiality respected, but with the proper consent, or though the collection of the data from medical clinician. This documentation can be used for justice process when the opportunity arises. In the past year, my colleague at the Physician of Human Rights are teaching me and other doctors in Iraq the skills we need to collect evidence of these crimes. We are learning from their experience in Congo and other countries and adapting documentation method to our own situation. Physician of Human Rights has connected me with advocates for justice in my country and beyond. Medical information must be concerned with the legal documentation. Unfortunately, the effort to document the gender-based crimes has not been well coordinated, and it is the time to collaborate more across government, UN agencies, Iraqi and international NGOs, so that we are not duplicating work and are all agreed on the best practices. Sadly, we have not yet witnessed a single prosecution in Iraq for the gender-based crimes committed against Yazidi peoples and others. As a doctor and scientist, we must also remember that there is evidence from victims of this violence who did not survive. One woman refused to be sold into sexual slavery, and choose instead to end her own life. Just a few months ago, her family found her remains in unmarked graves. Others certainly died in slavery. There are thousands of the women and girls still missing. We must be engaged as a Yazidi community together with the human rights and justice organization to support the effort to find the missing, whether they are alive or dead, and document their fate as well. The only way to do justice to the Yazidi victims and survivors to document, to record together their stories and the evidence and prove to the world exactly what happened to the Yazidi. To the little girl who will never see her mother again, it is the only way I will be able to look her in the face and say it simply, your suffering is not in vain. Through documentation using the highest international standards, we can give these women the rights and dignity they deserve. Thank you for having me.
Now we have been informed that we will have the honor of having shared a brief story from one of the ISIS victims. And I truly thank you for both coming and for wanting to share. So please, present yourself.
از خیر هاتنا و هموکاتكم إيرو از قلك يا ممنونم از البرحادر بوم ككيش آليكي من الدماء وبيش آليكي حكومتي وبي خلقي ما إيزدي بي از قلك يا ممنونم إشواك كهون في واجبي رادبن وهون قديامة بقاهينن.
I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful to have your attention here and the importance that you give to the topic in the Yazidi case.
نافمه نجلا خضر ماتويا ازش گنده کوچوما و ایدو 4 سالا کتا سالا پینجیدا 3000 کچوجن هاتان هل دست داعش دایا.
My name is Najla. I'm from Kocho village. It's been more than 4 years that there are still thousands of Yazidis missing in the captivities.
از بیجم يعني و 4 ساله هاتا فيهم كرن تشبوا مسيري وان أجيك شوانم وقتي كرت أسقد ياخوا بيجم.
I think 4 years are somehow enough in order to understand the shape of the crimes, and I'm one of them who was a part of these atrocities, the crimes being committed against.
داخوازم أو نينش بير كرن حتى أو كم إيرو نين رزقار كرن.
I demand that no one forgets them until they survive as I did.
أو مقابر الجماعي كاك داود كوت أسنسان إجتلي مهلنايس بجمد كوچو چندن إشبر عائلة مروفت مفا نايا قوتن بيك يوكا أحمد جاسوفا كنهات يذكراندن هاتانوها.
In terms of mass graves, I cannot tell and describe. Kagdaud already did. I cannot imagine how much sorrow I feel when talking about the mass graves in the village.
داخوازم أو زوترين وقت بينا فاكرين كابنك هنا بنيت شاندن حقي وانايا ونداكرين شبكر روجا كديتر افتشت بسري يكي نايب سري مهات منابب بسري يكي ديبه وبالأخص إيزدي.
I request that they accelerate the process of opening them in a right way, and the necessary action be taken in order to do the work on the mass graves.
أو خلقي مشكل كامبا وشادر هذا هون حالوان بلكي منظمات وبن زانبن بلكي إيكاش عراقي هاتي زانن تحالوانا تمسيري وانا تشن اختيمل نبدينا تشن دحياش داعش النبدينا مساعداوان زوترين وقت بيكرين وكك ألمانيا وقت أم 1000 كس آنين خوايكرين داخوازام أوكا كي دولت بكاري بكا زارو بكا بيرك بكا تشبي أو شي وكوان مساعداوان بكا وعلاجاوان بكا أسقلك يا ممنون مشوا.
Furthermore, talking about the Yazidi IDPs in the camps in the Hook, I think the organizations that are already working there will know the exact situation of the Yazidi displaced people. There are so many vulnerable peoples, orphans, female-headed families who are in dire need of support, humanitarian support. Mentioning one of the important initiatives as Germany did, which took many of the ISIS survivors and brought them to Germany for the sake of care and support. I demand also to continue such initiatives for whoever organization who could intervene in this situation.
متفيد دعوامة وقدياما نايا ونداكرن نايا شبيركرن نايا إهمالكرن.
I really emphasize that the case is not forgotten. It continues being brought to the mentioning.
Thank you very much.
ناوی من خیریه مرادا از خوشکا نادیای من نادیا چند وان همو کابو گلک يبقى بو الدلال بو خاصة البعض كامل نادياش مع ما زمان تربو براستي بزيرك تربو باحترام بو كفايتاتي يعني سالونا كديني مكياج وان چيكا دا كم قلت كتا مدرسة خلاص كرزيش ترى سالوني وكم 15 ماهاش هم کرنا مدرسه دا خوام برنا طبقه سری کچ کوجن و سوریان درو دوره گند میر همو برن الوی دره کشتن دا کد ما الوی درش ما قد کرن حودا کی ماسیای بر مهد دبو کرنا وی حودا ماسیا دا واوجی کشتن روجا دیتره ناو خواندینو هر کیجو جیبت رشانی نم کرنی دام فرود نهنه کدیتره از بنادیوان را نبرم 15 ماهاش کد مدرسه داعش حتی 24 ماهایک از هاد مکان به ده هک از هاتم با مثلا افتشت الوی تعقیبون نادیا الوی قلیچ که داد نوست و خوش کام ندی الوی داره نوست و کجا برایم الوی درادی نوست و ازو کرک الورد نوستن کرکی هکم بخور خلاص کردی و پشتی هنگه جن برا ما زن هاد داکا کاترین او دسی زاروا و دراهات امچونا پیش و درانی داکاوی کرکی حکم مبخورانی هات از مثلا زو نادیا و کچونا پیشوان درا خوشکاما مازن چو خارج والبيرا نادیا چو مگلا که یکو دو مثلا که هیله بی یکو دو هبو وقتی که داکا من نما ازو نادیا خوشکا خودی تره راستی ما پیکن مرتاح بون الویدره بس هر دو چون داشی مکن اف کچا برایمنی مازن بو اف کچاویا مازن بو بعد عشتات كخلاص ببقهما بيلي يعبوا كيكرل نيبا حاويجا وكركولن أف كاترين ونسرين هردونا أف طياري الفيدا الموصل وفي ناديا وفي أسف أزب خود شوما أقندي خوا أش شوما سر مغبراجنا يعني تشما همو قدكو زبونو كراسو اسبيبون خودي پورد هما در کتیبون و خودی دنانت هما لوی قادبون من نزانی کی هستی شوانی داکا من نسرا سر سکنی بون اشتكي داكا ما بي ناديا بي الوي غرفي كامل در نهيلا اف ترك ترى عام بو غين فيجي نهيلا بو نهاف مالا مايا اف جن برامنا اف وكا كرسيا عيالي ويبو هاف دكانا ويبو بجوختم چونا مال دي دكانا وي خراكلينو جيو خراكلينو وف كرسيا ويا وقت تيد رونيو كزاني او نينا وكاليب زحمت بو ساني او بو وادي خوش كامنا ناش دا كامنازو او اشچوما مال فكراسي دا كام بو ورداي جريداي بو مفكر وبراسي وكزعيج بون بسردا قديامو مقو چلوز بم مگو کراسی داکام بنی و چند سال او سا 4 سال اون سا ایش در وده داکام یکی کراسی داکام نگریه اعمال ده مبخوچو معنی مال مفکرش ویتری و بسر ده گریام مکراسی و بر بغرفاوی ده دیسا دالقاند و کبری تشتاقی دی داکا خوانا دی بخوادی غین وی अब नादिया दाका में अब कातरीन कचबराइन अबू यक्त तो कितनो हाँ नादिया تشتي تشوفها ناقرية خدي حقي ما جيب بها إيكا وصال ما كريو سري سببي دستي ما هم كاجي قد كري
ورا 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 ورا
ماشي ماشي
ورا 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 چار خویشکو و 12 برابون نادیاش مهما کچکتر بری فرمانی ل بالمدرسه بو پشتی فرمان هاتی اون همو زانی بادا کرم کوچو شش براد مو دایگام روزا 15 کوچو دا کشتن باکا باکا نالا نادیاف ندیتیا 19 ماه 12 ساله کوي گیا مزنب سره مهاجت کیفا مناد اشتك کیرته کا نادیال بربا مچي کربا باکا 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 بابا چلو تگا بابا چلو تگا دوا ہے دیر دوا ہے نادیا نادیا
روان
باي باي كش ناديا باي كش مثيرة باي
باي مثيرة باي باي كده
باي ناديا زي فخور مبتا بري همود اشتقي جايزة تبيروزيد كمو والخلق كردستان وخلق عراقي هموي والعالم هموي سبيروزيد كمو زي فخور مبتا تخوش كامني كده في شغليت كي وسر شغلي خبر دوام با كيفا مقال لقيته زي فخور مبتا
ناديا اس جايزة تبيروزيد كم خوش كامني وشتاوي تماجد كم ومدفي يعني وكا قهيتا بلنغازا همو كابي وكيفا وانجي قالك اشترتي و دفين يعني وقتي هكا مدبينن هكا قالت اسقالات بقم الباون قالك كيفا انتي دا مدفي قهيتا البلنغازا بي وتتشتاقيش بلنغازا جي ربكي تنش نفسيا من هوس خوشكاتا اما من نافتش من ربكي مدفيتش انساني بلنغاز ربكي وقهيتا البلنغازا بي وشتاوي تديسا ماجد كم خوشكادلا
Again, it's very hard to start this new session. I think at this point, I think I would just like to have 1 minute of silence. I hadn't planned this, but it just feels right to have 1 minute of silence, if that's okay, in memory of everybody who is lost, and in grief for everybody who are still missing somebody, and in hope that they will be reunited somehow. And that we all may do the little thing that we may to help that may happen. So, and with those words, I would like to welcome some of those heroes, not only the doctors and others doing their work to help the women. I would like to welcome the two who work on the ground in Dahuk and in Sinjar from the Norwegian Church Aid. We had Dr. Nagam is working closely with the Norwegian People's Aid, and we also have some of the partners of the Norwegian Church Aid. If you would like to come up, please, and we will have the microphone and we'll have a brief interview with you. So please, and also our great translator, who's not only that, but also assisting on that. Thank you, Zuair. So thank you. Yes. So yes, please. Yes. So okay. You're not coming up? Yes. Sure. You're coming. Okay, you will be translating. Thank you. Okay, come, please. Yes. No. I'm going to also ask you about your work. Thank you so much. So, I would like to just ask you what you are doing on the ground. You work as a psychologist advisor. So briefly, what is your work for the women?
My name is Susan. I'm clinical supervisor. I'm working with NCI as MHPSS clinical supervisor.
So you're advising those social workers who work with the women, and you're psychologists and psychologists. Thank you so much. And please also tell us what you do.
My name is Ra. I'm from Sinjar. I'm working in NCI, social work.
And what more specifically do you do, and what is the situation of the women that you work with?
Social worker شغلي ناجية تعرف جريدة بتر.
Our work is usually connected with the survivors from ISIS captivity.
نابيوان باخد تسجيل اتكن ودعميوان نفسيا واجتماعيا اتكن وقت ناجيات بدقرية أو منتهية أتبجي أس نوس نكارم تشتاقيش خرابكم.
When the survivors come, they come to us, and or we visit them and register them in our office, and we take care of them. Because when they were in ISIS captivity, they suffered a lot from the captivity, and when they come back, some of them, their families don't accept them. And when she comes here, she don't see the welcoming from the people.
NCA كNCA دعم نفسي اجتماعي كان مع الجان نفسي هيا دكتورة نفسي
we have a psychiatric
بالإضافة أن شغلي ما هكا أموان بخدمات قال NCA نبنش بلي خدمات الدعم النفسي واجتماعي أموان خدمات دي منتقبة برابطين.
Also, if we don't have the treatments for them, we usually send them to the doctors, and we provide them with the sick people. We provide them with help them in the society.
وما قالك ناجيات الشنغالي هنا وش حالات دي جيت كاش متدرج بان انتهاكات الداعش وكاز بجم هفاليوش شرهات يكوشتن يا كتب الداكا ويش نيزا بيا مرن الجادة الأفكام هاي الكائن موجود نفسي كأعراض النفسي البالهين ابتني NCA دكتور نفسي هاي السنجر.
We are as NCA we are the only NGO working on these cases on the females whom are rescued from ISIS and lost their family members.
And do you think that you have sufficient resources, human and others, to meet the needs of these women?
بيجت مثلا تباورت كي ومصادر يتقنش أنا وأنت اتصالت فان ناجية عربكا. Yes.
استافي قال سنون الشغل همو ادمحلينا وكان جزء كشوان معانا تتكوان ديتين ماجدين.
Yes, because all our staff whom are working in our office in Sinuni, in Sinjar, they are from the area and they have the information from the people and they be connected well to those people.
Thank you so much. And can I ask you, when you're giving advice, when you're giving psychological advice, what is your experience? What is the need, the psychological need of these women in dealing with their traumas? Okay. And how do you meet them?
Yeah. According to my experience, we have a lot of cases of post-traumatic stress disorder who has been escaped from the ISIS. Yeah, and we provide as we psychologists, we provide basic psychotherapy for them. And if the case needs, we refer to the psychiatrist. We have a psychiatrist in Sinone and in Sinjar. Maybe the case need psychotropic medication. Yeah, but my advisor sometimes when I provide it to the staff and because if the staff have a lot of cases of that trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and that post-traumatic stress disorder transferred to the social worker. And the social worker sometimes have the secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm teaching them how to deal with this kind of this problem because sometimes if the social worker and psychologist cannot manage the situation, it will be difficult for them and they cannot continue their work again.
Thank you so much. And we also are so privileged to have the one here who has initiated actually the manual that was established to dealing with the traumas of women after violence and war. And that's a manual that's been used both by the Norwegian Church and by the Norwegian People's Aid, for which Dr. Nagam is working. And that is Nora Sveås, actually. So I would like to invite you to also come and join us in this little discussion just briefly. She is, for those of you who don't know, in Norway, of course, she's very famous. She recently received the Human Rights Prize of the University of Oslo. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Oslo. She was the member of the UN Committee on Torture, and she is a member of the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture. So it's a real honor to have you here also, Nora. And I would just like to ask you briefly about this manual. Yes, you can take that one. What is this manual and how is it to be found for those who would need it?
Thank you very much, Ingvild, for this nice introduction. But I think I must say, just to start with, that I want to express my deep feelings of sorrow and compassion to all of you from the Yazidi community. It's it's quite strong to listen to this, but at the same time, I want to express my very strong solidarity and also my hope for your future, for your ongoing resilience, and for justice and accountability, which is absolutely necessary. And thank you for sharing your story also. It makes very deep impact. But as a psychologist myself, I've been working for many years with victims of sexual violence in conflict, and I have tried to see, and also through my experience in the UN system and other human rights work, I've been curious to see in what way is the mental health of those who are impacted, how is that taken care of? And I think today what we have heard is a wonderful expression of a very consciousness on the mental health aspects. You, Dr. Nagam, described this so vividly, and of course my colleague here also. But many places around in the world there's absolutely no focus on the mental health, or very little on mental health. So a group of us, of psychologists and psychiatrists, also engaged with the war on Bosnia, also with the Norwegian Popular Aid, tried to develop something which could be a training manual for those who are assisting and supporting the women when things happen. As you said, they don't even want to look at me, and they look down and definitely not want to tell the story in the beginning. So, of course, you as very professional know exactly how to deal with this, but there's so many people out there who don't know how to deal with it, and then they practically refrain from going into contact of fear that they are doing something wrong. So we developed very much based on the experiences of Congo, because our colleagues had also worked for many years in Congo together with the mamas in connection to the Panzi hospital. So we developed something which we hope can be used on the ground as a training manual, not as anything directive as such, but to give an understanding both of strength and of how trauma, this kind of trauma, affects people, and what can be good to try to give some feeling of dignity, some feeling of control and strength back. This is our aim, and to do this, of course, in very close collaboration with those who are doing this in the different places. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. You may have it already, but I want to give it to you.
So, thank you. I would like to ask actually the presenters, Dr. Nagam and Catherine, and as well as Susan and Nora, just to take place, and also you, Susan, in the seats here, and we'll have a possibility for asking them questions or to even have a discussion between you. So please, thank you also. Thank you so much. So yes, please. Yes, Catherine as well. So all those who have had interventions and taken part in the discussion now. So please, we open for questions and comments, but let me first hear from those of you, and you have one microphone over there? Yes, you do. Maybe Dr. Nagam, maybe we want to start on what actually is needed from the international community to support the work that you do. What are your further needs for as regards resources, competence, whatever, please, to assist these women?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. As I said, the women I meet today, they lost the trust, they lost hope. All the time, they feeling they don't have a future. So to rebuild not only the survivor, all the Yazidi people, if you ask them, they feel they are afraid, they are unprotected, they don't have a future. So you should, if you want to rebuild this community, you should protect them. I ask international community to protect the survivor and international community, and to help Yazidi community to get a justice. Without justice, we cannot rebuild this community. We cannot rebuild the trust of this community. So justice is very important to help this community. When Nadia Murad got a Nobel Prize, it was very important to give us a power as a Yazidi people, to give us a hope that international community they know what happened, and they want to support the Yazidi community. This prize, it helped to heal the wound of the Yazidi community. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe would you like, Susan, to develop on that? What, from your perspective, would be the important support from the international community to assist your great work?
Okay, thank you for having me. Yes, I think the mental health is so important for people who has been traumatized, because in Kurdistan we have a lot of NGO. They're providing support to women. For example, they are providing case management, but the mental health has been neglected. I don't know why. Maybe we don't have a lot of experience to work, especially with the people who has been traumatized. Yeah, thank you for having this curriculum. I think it is too important, and we will get a lot of information from this curriculum. Another thing, I want to focus on the service, because in Kurdistan we provided case management and psychosocial support for women, but we don't have a lot of access about legal assistance. We have a lot of cases they need, for example, they need ID and they want to make some documentation, but legal service is still locked in Kurdistan, and it will be the problem for the people to get the ID, and some of them, the family has been divided, some of them in Kurdistan, another in Europe. They cannot reach to their family because they don't have an ID, they don't have a passport. Yeah, that is a big challenge for us in Kurdistan.
Thank you. And that leaves me, actually, I want to ask Catherine Bamberger about this, because that's one of the issues that you raised regarding identification, and which has been raised by several, that some people are really not only stateless, but without any identification, also as a consequence of their ISIS capture and also being born during that capture. So could you please tell me something about what is needed from the international community to address these challenges, both as regards women and men, obviously?
Yep. No, exactly. With all armed conflicts, people leave these areas, their houses are burned, they have no more documentation to prove their identity. A mother cannot prove that her child is her child sometimes because there are no birth certificates, passports anymore if they're separated to be able to prove this. So one woman from Srebrenica, for example, her son was taken away. All she had left of her son was a fingerprint in a Nivea can in the cream of his existence. That was it. The house was gone, documentation was gone. So using DNA later on to be able to identify her son was the only way for her psychologically to come to terms again with his existence, that he did exist, because part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, part of the country politically had been denying the existence of this genocide and therefore denying the actual existence of her son. So being able to use DNA to identify her son allowed her to state unequivocally, I have a son, he existed, this past that I had does exist. So ensuring that families of the missing are actively involved. I'm not a psychologist, but I've talked to Dr. Kiselhan about these cases. Ensuring that families of the missing can be actively engaged in pursuing rights, in finding a missing person, does appear to have psychological benefits. And this was certainly the case with women from Srebrenica, who I have a lot of experience in working with, that their active participation, making these cases public. And this is very difficult because many women fear reprisals if they launch an investigation into a disappeared person. But in fact, with the former Yugoslavia and Srebrenica, we put all of these cases online, including the ability to get additional relatives to provide genetic data. So the families of the missing are in the driver's seat. And there's a weak civil society, unfortunately, in Iraq. So, and we forget about the survivors, but they have to be front and center of a process in dealing with atrocities, and especially when it comes to accounting for missing persons.
Thank you, Catherine. And then to you, Noura, I would like to, of course, you can add whatever you like, but at least the importance of prevention, since you are a member now of the subcommittee on prevention of torture, the importance of, or the impact of documentation in works for preventing not only torture, but also other atrocities.
Yes, and I just wanted to comment also, because you said, Catherine, you're not a psychologist, but I took very strong note of your comments about this cannot be done without the close consent and collaboration with the family. And to me, that's so important, because there have been some examples of mass graves being opened where the family is not informed, and it's like losing once more. So I really took note of that. And I think also what you said about working through a human rights lens is extremely important. And as to what should be done on an international scale, I would say it's to really make health professionals also more aware of the human rights, and of course human rights professionals more aware of health needs and psychological aspects. So this I find extremely important that you're stressing in the way that you're doing. As to prevention, of course, and I think this Nobel Prize this year has such a strong impact, hopefully, on prevention, because I just received the Leo Eitinger Prize, it is called, and I was reading one of his books the other day to prepare my speech. And one of the things he said many years ago, it was in the end of the 80s, he said so clearly that there's no healing without justice and without knowing the truth. And I think this is what we've been saying. So as to prevention, I think it's I hope that the prevention of this form of abuse can really be worked on. The work that we're doing in the subcommittee for the prevention of torture is mainly on persons who are already deprived of their liberty, but we try to stress that we must also come into or be able to work in sites which are not necessarily public sites, so this is a big and long discussion. But prevention, that this can really happen, and that states know that there's no impunity for such violence, and accepting also private actors doing this, because this, I think, will be our major challenge these days, is to have states take responsibility for private actors. So there's a lot to be said about this, but yes, prevention and also the right to rehabilitation are two of my main issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we will, after this little round, we will also open now for questions or comments to the panel, or in general on the topic, the two topics of documentation in relation to missing persons and documentation in relation to gender-based violence in conflict and war, those two topics that we hold in this session. So yes, I open for comments and questions, or even comments within the panel if you like. But let's first open to the general audience. This is, yes? And please, a brief presentation, your name, and yes, Ido Babashik. I know.
Thank you, and thanks to the ladies. My name is Ido Babashik, the brother of the Babashik of the Yazidis. I want to add some things to the ladies' speech. I think the important thing is the security of the Yazidi community now, because, you know, a lot of the people, they were replaced, but a lot of them, they return back. Just the Yazidis of the Sinjar, they until now, they live in the tents. And you know, the life of the tents is very difficult in the winter and in the summer also. The lady spoke about the documents. Not just the documents are our people, our problem. Our problem is to live in their houses, to live in security. And this is the conflict between the more forces in Sinjar, and the people till now, they are afraid to go to Sinjar, because some collections villages are very close or near to Ba'aj. And Ba'aj till now, I think it is full of ISIS. And the second point is that these villages or the area of Sinjar till now is full of the bombs or mines. And also this is a second point. And the third point, the Yazidis, as Mr. Daoud Khatari, he spoke about the struggle of the Yazidi of fighting, but we just not just fighting with weapon, we fighting with the society struggle also, or civil society, because now we have a lot of the girls and boys, they fight it on the, you know, one of them is Nadia and Nagam and a lot of our girls. And if we compare it between the Ba'ashika, for example, and Sinjar, The people of Bashika, when they return back, they rebuilt a lot of their things. Even they rebuilt the shrines, their shrines. A lot of the shrines are destroyed. They could rebuild it, all of this. But Sinjar, they have no chance to do anything. Therefore, I think we need support of the international society and the Iraqi government and KRG also. Thank you. I don't want to speak more. And I apologize for my English.
No, that's so 10,000 is better than my Kurdish. Thank you so much. It was crystal clear and very important points that you addressed. Would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Yazidi genocide, it is not at the 3rd August 2014 and stop. Yazidi genocide, it is till now ongoing. Till now we have more than 3,200 cases, they are still missing. Till now we have the survivors coming from captivity of ISIS and traumatized and beaten and raped and sold between ISIS fighter coming from captivity and become more traumatized when she lived in a small tent in the Kurdistan. How we can manage these cases? I asked many NGO and many delegation coming. I told them how I can help those people, and they are still living in the bad situation in the camps. They feel they don't have a future. And also till now, as Mr. Eido said, the people, the Yazidi people, they feel they are unsecured because they don't have guarantees that what happened not happen in the future again. So we cannot encourage all the people. They told us you should encourage the people to go back to the Sinjar, and we cannot encourage them because there's no protection, there's no security. The fights between many militaries there, it affected on the people. This is important to security and protection for Yazidi community. To rebuild this community, it's very important. The second thing, it is, there is no services for Sinjar. There's no electricity, no water, no hospital, no schools. How we can encourage people to go back to the Sinjar? So the security and protection of the people, the caring, I ask also international community to care more about the survivor because they take, if you ask many international NGO, they told us we're working with the survivor, but if you see, there is no change in the life of the survivor. All of them, they are living in the bad situation in the camps. So I ask international community to support Yazidi community and especially survivor more and more.
Thank you. We have actually time for more comments and questions. Yes, please. Could we have a microphone down there? And please also briefly say who you are.
Mohammed Al-Mufti, writer and political advisor. I'm so sorry I cannot speak English very well. I hope one of you can translate to them, please. For det første, når vi snakker om barna til de jezidiene, det ikke lettere at de aksepterer den. Det to forskjellige kulturer. Det hele kulturen som aksepterer ikke det. Hvis familien aksepterer dette her, kommer de på skolen til å bli mobbet og andre ting. Det ikke Norge. Det to forskjellige kulturer. Det ikke tyske barn. Så det veldig viktig at de jobber organisert arbeid rettet mot disse barna. Og den andre, det som veldig viktig for meg å spørre, de som har begått de brutalitetene, de fortsatt lever i fri fot, de ikke blir forfulgt, de blir ikke straffet. De bor i Mosul, de bor andre steder. Så det veldig synd, de kommer aldri til å bygge broer mellom det samfunnet som blir splittet i alle. Kan det internasjonale komité jobbe for å straffe og forfølge de som har begått dette her? Takk.
Thank you. So I will try to do a brief summary in English. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong. You had 2 points. The first point was that we need to understand that the context is very different from Norway. So as regards the enormous challenges, both at the individual and collective level, as regards the children who are a result of rape from ISIS, we have to understand the true dilemma of that for the individuals and the community concerned. And the second point was that we need to also understand that the fact that people who are the perpetrators are still not punished, not put to justice, and that this creates a very strong feeling of distrust and also sense of lack of follow-up at various levels, and that needs to be addressed. What will the international community do to address that issue of impunity? Is that correct? Thank you. So do anybody, and now I can open for, anybody wants to comment on these issues, either in the panel of or other speakers, I don't know. Or it's more like a statement. Yes, please. Yes. Please, and present yourself.
My name is Mama Othman. I am the Vice Dean of the Institute of Psychotherapy and Psychotraumatology at the University of The Hague. And with great thanks, the German authorities, the state Baden-Württemberg, assisted us to establish this institute. She mentioned that she was in contact with Professor Kizlan. So instead of sending all the patients abroad, we are trying to treat them there. And it's an academic study. It takes 3 years. And we have 2 groups. They are studying MA. We take only graduates from the medicine or from psychologists. So the subject of approaching the Yazidian theme are becoming very numerous. And it's sorry that they are not tackled systematically. There should be a political commitment to tackle the raise issued by many friends, colleagues here, on how to protect the Yazidis. The infrastructure, as been mentioned, is totally destroyed. But the idea is that the Yazidi themselves, they are patchy, they are ill-organized. So we are only getting help as a kind of sympathy, not because we are a power there. We are divided between the central government and between the KRG. Some of the Yazidis are on this side, some are on the other side. As mentioned, I think it is the responsibility of the world community to take some political commitments to work as a lobby, implementing some important issues for the existence of the Yazidis who are still there, because gradually they are leaving. So we were about 500,000, and now we are only about 300,000 no more. So I think if I were a normal person, I'm myself, I'm Yazidi there. If I were a normal person, I would also think to take my kids abroad to let them live in a safe country. So still, they are insecure. Still, there is no commitment that they can survive there. And Kurdistan or the Iraq with the minorities, without minorities, special the Christian and the Yazidis. So it will be a one-sided. It will be a one color, and I think they will lose their reputation also. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, yes, please.
Thank you for everyone. I'm engineer Jawar Suleiman, and writer about the Yazidis affairs. So about the genocide, I think the genocide, it must be a big project to fix the genocide. So the first point, you need the financial for the this project. So we have any project, as engineer, when we make any project, we need financial for this project. First point, how we can get this financial? how we get these amounts of financing for the project. Second point, to unite the efforts for the groups. Now we see that the working as group or individual efforts. This is a big mistake, especially for the mass graves, for how you open the mass graves and make the studies for this. This is not easy. It is very necessary, important, the specialist for the working and how to make the DNA test, and it need very efforts to fix this point. The third point, I think, how we can change the human or international morals to move to this case. Because this case, not just a genocide, this case or this problem is the future of a people, the future of the minority life during thousands years in this area, in this land, Mesopotamia. How we can deal with this case. So the other affairs, for example, now Nadia Marat, we read for this prize. I think how we can use this prize and getting this prize for this case also, for fixing the genocide, and the other how we can help our people now living in the tents, in the very bad situation in the summer and in the winter. Thank you too much.
Thank you. Yes, this is exactly the question and the challenge. And I think at this point I would like to just say that this is really bridging in a very, with these great interventions, this session to the next and final session, because here we address the missing person in general, but also the gender-based violence and the follow-up on that and the need for documentation. While in the next and final session, where we'll have this continue our discussion, we also address the question of the role of civil society and international community in ensuring justice as a step for a possible future reconciliation as well. So, but just opening for a brief round of comments at the end from our introducers, please.
To comment on what the two gentlemen said, which were excellent comments, because I think you addressed the elephant in the room, politics. And this is something we have to address head on, not only, on an international level, but also in Iraq itself. And I think for the biggest factor in inhibiting a process to account for the missing across Iraq, and particularly with Sinjar, is politics. With the second gentleman, and we can get into that for hours, and also the divisions between the Yazidi community. They must be united. They must be united front in saying what they want and in demanding their rights. And I think this is why this event is so important. When it comes to excavations, yes, those can be costly. ICMP is there. We are encouraging the Iraqi government, meaning together, through this Committee 6 process, because this is important for creating a sustainable process to account for all missing persons. But we are on standby to use our forensic archaeologists and anthropologists, our DNA laboratory, which has done the most cases of any identifications anywhere in the world, is absolutely at your disposal as soon as this process starts to help in this case.
Nora or Suzanne or Dr. Naba? Yes.
Yeah, would you like to?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking of what we have been. We've been discussing so many things from very concrete. How can we support, for instance, mothers of children born out of rape that was raised by the gentleman here in Norwegian, up till the big macro political issues that we were just mentioning now. But I've been thinking, we have heard about the Rohingya genocide, we are hearing about the Yazidi genocide, and they're extremely recent. They're ongoing, and it has also been stressed the importance of having information out early, and even information and reports of inquiry. These things are out very early, and then I'm asking myself, how in the world is it not possible to manage to prevent? to stop things earlier. How can the world let it happen? So to me, this is really the challenge to find ways of, with all the information that we've had from the very beginning throughout where we are today. Yeah, well, it was the same discussion we had with Rwanda, of course, but how can the world learn? So I think I just want to share this side that I think I share with all of you. How can we stop this from happening? And then, of course, we need full justice and accountability. Thank you.
Yes, behalf on all psychologists and psychiatrists in Duke, I would like to thank Dr. Nagam because she provided a lot of support to Yazidi women and survivors, and she was so hard worker and she was so collaborative with us. And thank you too much for your job, and it is too much appreciated for all of us. Thank you.
Dr. Nagam, do you would like to have the final words of this session?
As I said, really, I'm here today to motivate more international community to support Yazidi more and more, because really we need support. What happened, it is not easy. Because I'm working in this field since 2014 till now, and I treat about 1,200 cases of the survivor from 8 years to 65 years. They are big traumatized. They are poor. Nobody supported them. So, and till now we have the children which coming from captivity of ISIS. I ask many NGO to support them more because those children, they trained as a bomber and nobody carrying them. And they become bomber and they have a violence. So we should support the children coming from captivity, support the woman survivor more and more to give her the dignity they deserve. And also, I ask the international community to work with us to make a woman as a gun of the war. Thank you so much.
Thank you.